We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And we've got some exciting remote control news this week. It's going to be in the news. There's going to be a question about it. It's going to be peppered throughout.
So much remote news. So exciting.
Remote controls.
Exciting. And in case you're wondering, but let me spoiler alert, Harmony's still dead.
Yeah. It's not that. Sorry. I didn't
and
anticipate.
So my little bit of research, which is very little bit of research on the resellers of any sort of Harmony hub-based remote online is you have one of two choices. You can get either like fully scalped, like 200 to 300% the original price.
Oh, I see. Sure.
Or you can buy garbage. Because they'll sell you if it looks like it's about it's going to be like old and God knows what's wrong with it. So
okay.
Don't buy used Harmonies right now, or maybe ever again.
Well, there's not much opportunity. No more are being manufactured, so that's all there is.
I know.
And that's why today's news might, we're hoping, fingers crossed, toes crossed, it'll end up being good news.
Well, we have both put our money where our mouth is, because we both decided that we were going to bet on this horse, because that seems to be the only horse in the race.
It's the only horse on the track. So
it may have three legs.
Get your bets in.
it might have to be drug across the finish line by its bridle. It may be a little quirky with one eye going one way and one eye going the other, but it's the only horse.
We're gonna find out.
So we're betting on it.
Just teasing it.
There's a teaser. Ooh, everybody's excited.
Hope so.
So what's going on with you, Rob, before we get into the podcast? Anything new and interesting? Let's stretch this out.
No, I don't really think we do not need to stretch it out, Tom. We have 15 questions on the list.
I'm not worried about those questions.
We got news. There is a pile to get to.
It'll be fine.
Definitely don't need to stretch it out.
Nobody's going to die if they don't get their question answered on this podcast.
Nothing super interesting happening on my side, so no. There we go. You want to talk about something, don't you? That's what always happens.
I don't really have anything to talk about. I should be talking about the hurricane that affected a whole bunch of my family, and I was just so busy doing other things this weekend that I somehow completely missed that there was even a hurricane. I knew it was coming. I knew it was a thing, and people were worried about it, but I was like, oh yeah, hurricane, Louisiana, that's the thing that happens like every year, so... Do I really have to pay attention? I should have been paying attention. So, as far as I know, all my friends and family are safe, which is great. But there's a lot of devastation going on right there. So if you're in that area and you literally have nothing to do but listen to the podcast, we're for you. This is it. Don't waste your battery on it if you're out of power.
Right.
But
But we can be a distraction if you're all right.
We can distract you from all that. So, and we send you our best wishes and hope for a speedy return to power and water, depending on where you are. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com. Leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/avrantpodcast. YouTube.com/avrant. You can contact us directly. Rob at avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at avrant_Tom. So I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com and click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. That will send you to a PayPal donation site. I have not had enough coffee. My mouth is not working properly. Where PayPal will take either from your account or from your credit card, anonymously, if you so desire, and gives most of it to us and keep a little bit for themselves. So we want to thank Mark for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much for that PayPal donation. Really do appreciate the financial support.
We do. And we want to thank our 133 patrons over at patreon.com. Trending up. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. It's where you can become a contributing, supporting listener of our podcast community. Every month, they can take as little as $1, as much as infinity dollars from you, and give majority, hopefully, to us, and keep a little bit for themselves to, pay the overhead and buy Lamborghinis for people that aren't us. So we want to thank our 133 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yeah, that's the highest number we've ever seen over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. So that is exciting. Thank you very much to the 133 patrons. We are recording this, though, on the very last day of the month. And on the first day of the month, when they actually start charging cards, the number always drops down from
they
cards that
when your card fails
weren't actually there. So we'll see what the real number is tomorrow. But for right now, while we're recording this, 133, that's awesome. Thank you so much to everybody.
It's a glass is half full kind of day.
That's right.
That's what this is.
We'll take it where we can.
It's a Rob kind of day. Tomorrow's going to be a Tom kind of day.
All right.
We also want to thank Andrew, who sent us both Amazon gift cards, which, again, no matter what I do, always ends up in the trash. I don't know why. I can't.
Great.
I always got. You have to find. Someone has to tell me that I got it, and I have to go dig it out. So that's what I did today. I dug it out.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much for the Amazon gift card. Very appreciated.
Right. So if you can't support us, what is this? Is this a thing? Okay. Anyway, so if you can't support us financially, tell us what you did to support us, and we will mention you here. So Infinite Gary sent a link for Jason, who is looking for a dual cassette deck for his son. How is that helping us? What?
Well, I don't know where else to put it. I think that you're helping out the community, helping out our listeners. So there, I put it in the listeners of the week. I don't know where else to put it. Comments, I guess. I guess it could have been.
I think it's a comment. That doesn't seem like a You don't get credit, Gary. I'm taking it back.
It was a helping.
You're not a listener of the week, Gary.
Specific. So there you go.
I mean, that's kind of talking this up, but I mean, come on.
I forwarded the link to Jason
on
in
Reddit
any case,
or something
to see if he's interested.
Terry talked us up to Seymour AV. They know us well, so I'm glad that they are reminded that we're still alive.
Thank you, Terry.
And we did have this happen, but it doesn't have the person's name here. Somebody sent me photos.
Oh, that's right.
Permission.
Yeah, I forgot to put the name in there.
It is David.
David. That sounds
David
right.
sent me photos to use on AV gadgets. I downloaded them. I haven't had a chance to look at them yet, but I've downloaded. They look very colorful and bright, which is something that
is good for a website.
Good for a website. Often hard to do in the home theater. I get a lot of photographs where I'm like,
I know there's something in there, but that's a whole lot of black.
I assume that there might be equipment in this room someplace. I see reflections and shadows slightly here and there. I want to adjust the contrast just to make things pop. So David's were very colorful. So thank you, David.
Yeah, that's awesome, David. Thanks for sending Tom that permission to use those photos on avgadgets.com, where Tom is the editor-in-chief. And pretty much doing everything over there for the time being.
For the time being. That's right. So we also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during the ongoing and ever-worsening pandemic. So we've got Jack Daniel, who wanted to say thank you for our explanation. Jack and Daniel, two different people. So there's Jack, and there's also Daniel, who wanted to say thank you for our explanation on how speakers become louder in response to a higher wattage signal. Nick, who wanted to say he's so glad we recommend Ascend Acoustics. He also forwarded a thread on Ascend's own forum in which David Fabrikant, the owner of Ascend, is detailing the incredible lengths he has gone to in response to Audio Science Review's bad-looking measurements of the Luna and Duo speakers. Jay tried to give us a heads up about a JVC webinar on their new laser projector models, but by the time you're hearing this, that webinar has already taken place, and I didn't go to it. Did you go to it?
It's tomorrow, so... Oh. That is in between the time we record this and post it.
Okay.
There will be other announcements about the JVC. They are making the rounds because they want to get the word out. So we will have opportunities to learn all about those laser projectors.
All right. John, and then another David, says he went all the way back to episode 250 to start listening to every episode again. What a fun time capsule. Oh, my goodness. Matt, Steven, listeners since the Dina days. Okay, Steve.
Yeah.
And Kevin. So let's go back through this. We've got Jack, Daniel, Nick, Jay, John, David, Matt, Steven, and Kevin. So thank you all for thanking us.
Indeed. I'll say the names once more. Jack, Daniel, Nick, Jay, John, David, Matt, Steven, and Kevin. Thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude sent to us for keeping the podcast going, the notes of encouragement that we very much appreciate. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. I just wanted to make one quick comment on what Nick said there about the Ascend Acoustics. If you did look at the reviews over on Audio Science Review, the main thing they were pointing out was this nasty-looking sort of, I don't even know what to, I mean, we know what to call it now, but this nasty looking thing in the graph that they tracked down to being the front mounted slot port. They're like, okay, when we're measuring that slot port, we're getting this like spike that looks like a resonance coming out of the port. And so, yeah, that looked nasty in the graph. But yeah, basically David Fabrikant went on quite the journey and invested thousands upon thousands of dollars buying new equipment to first replicate the measurements, because he's like, yeah, they're using the Klippel system. If that says this measurement is possible, then it must be possible. And so he invested a ton in new measurement equipment. I think he actually even went and got a Klippel himself. And he's like, let's first replicate it, then let's figure out why. And at the end of it all, it's like, yeah, the mic was so close that it was showing an anomaly that isn't visible once you get more than a foot away. And that seems to be what it was.
You like completely dropped off. Like
I know.
You said, and what they said was, and I went,
our Skype call went down,
and then you went blank.
You'll have to come back and listen to it, Tom.
I'll have to listen to the podcast or not.
But anyway, if you want to read all the details from David himself, then there it is. We'll have the link to the thread.
It's so funny because stuff like that, little things, and I know it doesn't sound very little, but little things can blow up on the internet and just absolutely tank a company just by somebody doing something and not knowing, or not understanding what they're looking at, And I see that all the time in like the real world. We have a lot of construction going on near our house. There's a bridge being built that was falling down, and then there's a new rec center for the neighborhood that's being built. And people constantly post on Facebook, and they're like, "Oh, look how stupid this is, and this is terrible." And my wife's like, who's a civil engineer, she's looking at it, she's like, "That is absolutely normal. It's exactly how it does. This is going to fall on somebody." She's like, "The thing's 120 feet deep. It's not falling on anybody, you idiots." But people get all up in arms, and next thing you know, somebody's complaining to somebody, and the mayor's stepping in and asking questions, and it's ridiculous. But online, a company like Ascend,
right,
having a bad measurement a review with a bad measurement in it without a good explanation, that can be real bad. So I'm glad that he got to the bottom.
Yeah,
of it.
that's why
it cost him so much money.
It was replicatable. He had to go to great lengths, but it was replicatable. So it's not as though it was like a true just error on the part of the measurement. Right. It was like, no, you can replicate this measurement under the right circumstances. But yeah, quite the journey. I don't have all the technical. It is in there in the thread, and that is the place to read it. We'll have the link.
All right. So in the news, for those of you that have been waiting, I'm going to skip the first one. All right. There might be a viable Harmony remote replacement on the way.
Fingers crossed.
We hope. So the company behind the $50 Sofabaton U1 is currently running a Kickstarter campaign for the Sofabaton X1 because X is better than U.
It is farther down the alphabet. That's how that works.
If there was a lowercase I in front of it, it would be the perfect solution, but they're waiting for that. That'll be after the X2 comes out. So the Sofabaton X1, which is a hub-based system that uses activities to control up to 50 devices. Expected retail price is $190, but Kickstarter pledged to back the X1 ahead of its November launch is 50% off. Okay, so if you buy it from Kickstarter right now, is it still 50% off? I thought it was. There was like
there's no longer free shipping.
Okay, so there was a day one deal where you got
free shipping
extra.
Yeah, for the very first 2 days when it was on Kickstarter, it was 50% off and free shipping. Now it is just 50% off. It is no longer free shipping, but you can still get it on Kickstarter. While you're hearing this, the campaign is still running for another 30-something days by the time you're listening to this.
Yeah, so. they 4 minutes it took them to fully fund
That's
that.
right.
I think they asked for $10,000. I'm like, you guys are just this is just publicity.
Yeah, sure, of course, yeah.
This is not really. You're not Kickstarting this.
Not truly.
Like some Kickstarters, you are giving them money so they can build the thing that they want to build.
Right.
They've we're going to build this.
No, I mean they already made the U1, and I have a U1 here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it much more in depth when we get to the person who's asking us about the U1 and the X1. So that's where I'll dig into it. But I have been playing around with the U1 a little bit. So I mean they are capable, this company, of physically making a remote. The X1 is essentially already done because they're ready to ship the thing in November. That's coming up in the rest of the text here.
Right. So compared to the U1, it's supposed to have the X1 is supposed to have a higher build quality with built-in rechargeable battery that can last up to 2 months. It has fewer hard buttons than the U1. There's no number pad, but a larger screen. It's not a touch screen. Which, you know what? I'm kind of okay with. The touch screen on the Harmony is probably my least favorite feature of the thing.
Yeah, it's kind of slow to respond on the Harmony quite often.
And, you know, the only thing I want is like activity 1, activity 2. You know, I just want those activities. I do like that you can rename them on the screen, but I literally don't want the screen to do anything after I get into an activity, because if I'm at that point, things have already gone wrong. It's not a touch screen. They're keeping the scroll wheel design, which is fine with me. And of course, the actual IR, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi signals are sent out from the hub, which also comes with some IR extender cables, so you don't have to physically point the remote at your devices. All setup is done via smartphone tablet app. Now you can use the app itself as a remote as well. The other thing that the U1 doesn't have is backlit buttons. Is that still correct?
That is correct. Yeah, the little screen, if anybody is seeing it on YouTube, the little screen, so it's hard to see. It lights up a little bit, but all it is a list of the devices that you put in there. That's all there is on the screen. This scroll wheel on the U1 is not a button. It is just a scroll to select whatever's on the screen. That's all that lights up. None of the buttons light up on the U1, but on the X1, they are supposed to light up.
They are supposed to, yes. And the weird thing is you had to dig into the features to even find that out.
Yeah,
like it wasn't front and center on the page. Like as much as people complained about that, they were like, yeah, no one really cares. You should have put that and now our buttons light up. Should have been like new hub-based system with illuminated buttons. You know, it should have been just as big. But so I ordered 2.
Okay, I ordered 1.
I ordered 1 for me and 1 for my parents in case either of our Harmonies breaks. Essentially, is what I did. So we'll see.
We will see how it goes. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really have like the full soft button setup of a Harmony, so I'm not sure exactly how programmable that screen with the scroll wheel ends up being. You know, as far as putting in lesser used commands with a button name of your own choice. You know, you write in the name. I don't know how well all that's going to work. It's not really detailed in the Kickstarter product page. They did say that, if you need to put in a specific channel number, that they're like, they were a little wishy-washy, like it's not going to be a number pad because it's not a touch screen. So I guess you could just have 1 through 0
on the scroll wheel.
On the scroll wheel, or they.
It's weird that you can't click the scroll wheel. It seems like clicking the scroll wheel.
Well, see, I don't know if you can click the scroll wheel on the X1. That isn't super clear either. It looks different than the scroll wheel on the U1. So there are unknowns here. They definitely said there will be a favorites page though on each activity, and that's where they suggest putting in all the soft buttons. Is within the favorites section that was mentioned in the comments. So, it's figuring out exactly what the UI is going to be is still a bit of a mystery. But in the absence of Harmonies, this is...
Let's just all expect that it's not going to be as good as Harmony. I mean, Harmony had decades practically to lock down their UI and their buttons and everything. And when they put out their first hub-based remote, people were like, why are these buttons above the screen?
There's that.
Who thought putting the buttons above the screen was a good idea? And they immediately moved them down on the next one. But this is a company that's been doing it for decades, and they were still having problems, giving customers exactly what they wanted. So to think that this is going to come out the gate and be like a true Harmony replacement, where you're going to feel the same sort of control that Harmony gave you. Harmony remotes too also have IR that comes out of them. So this one sounds like it's just coming out of the hub, which is fine, but sometimes...
again, not totally clear, because it still has an IR learning function, and on the U1, the IR learning function is on the front, so you aim that at the output of your original remote, and it can learn there, and so they're saying the X1 can also learn, so it would seem like it has an IR port. Now, if that is only an input, that could be it, but I don't know if the X1 also has an IR output on the front of it, but yes... There are unknowns for sure, but we're basically figuring that since we're buying it off a Kickstarter at half the price, and then it's going to be on Amazon at $190. That even if it's not that great, we can sell it at the price we bought it for and still give somebody a deal.
Right. I'm just hoping that somebody over at Logitech kicks out whoever it is that killed Harmony and brings Harmony back, because it's ridiculous.
Would be the CEO.
It's ludicrous to have an absolute monopoly on the market. Like, you are the game in town. Like, nobody can compete against you. And you're like, you know what? We're done. We're just going to take our ball and go home.
Yep.
Why? I mean, it doesn't make any difference how much money you're making. You are making as much money as can be made in this industry. It might not be a lot, but you're still making all of it. You're making the lion's share. Like, everybody else who's getting the other remotes are like trying to convince their friends to get a non-harmony. Everybody's like, you've lost your mind. Why would I do that? All right, so you've got next news story here. If you've got one of the 2020 Yamaha receivers that promised HDMI 2.1, there's bad news. Yamaha already said a while ago that you would need to ship your 2020 HDMI 2.1 receiver to a service center to have its HDMI board replaced, as reported on AV Gadgets.
That is true.
The promised firmware update wasn't going to fix things, which... I mean, that's what happens when you let Emotiva do stuff. But now it turns out that even after a hardware replacement, the HDMI 2.1 ports are still limited to 24 gigabits per second. Technically, 24 gigabits per second can pass through 4K 120 but only with 420 chroma subsampling, which is mostly fine.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of HDR that's just RGB, and that isn't going to work. RGB ends up using the same bandwidth as the full 444 chroma sampling, where nothing has been subsampled, where there is no savings of data bandwidth in 444 chroma or in just full-out RGB, and that doesn't work at 120 hertz through these ports. So that is definitely part of the problem.
So... if you're careful with your Xbox Series X and GPU settings, you can avoid getting nothing but a black screen, but this isn't what customers were expecting. This affects the V4A, the V6A, and the TSR 700 version sold at Costco, and the A2A models. The Avantage models that came out in 2021 have 40 gigabits per second HDMI 2.1 ports, but those are still waiting on a firmware update to get 4K 120 working. Everybody send your hate mail to Emotiva. Sorry, guys.
It has nothing to do with Emotiva. That is being said facetiously. This is 100% on Yamaha. Just to make it clear, because we have some folks who are listening in other countries, and they might not know you're entirely joking about that.
I know.
Yes.
I know. That's why I have you around, because if not, I would just make jokes and assume that people knew what I was talking about. Hey, you don't listen to 2 hours of our podcast and pay attention to every word that comes out of my mouth, then it's your fault that you misconstrued. And Emotiva's like, who is bad-mouthing us on the AVRant podcast?
Yes, this is bad news for Yamaha. That is not what we want to hear. This is not the type of news we want to see. So yeah, that's making me very hesitant to recommend Yamaha at the moment.
Well, the other thing, like if they had done the fix that Denon had done, which was just give you a box that had the right board in it. I mean, it's not as elegant a fix, but I don't have to unhook my entire receiver and get rid of it for a certain period of time just to have it come back and not be right. They could have just been like, okay, well, we sent you a box. Turns out that box doesn't do everything we want either. We're going to send you another box.
Right.
But it's going to take a couple more months. But at least you have a box that can do most of what you want.
This is a very half-measure solution.
I did not like the solution that they had to begin with.
Yeah.
I thought the solution was put together specifically to dissuade people from getting the fix. Like, do you really want to go without a receiver for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month or 2 months or 3 months or however long it's going to take us to get this board in there? And then to have it come back and not be fully functional is just... It's not a good look, Rob.
Disappointing.
It's not a good look.
Very disappointing.
Yeah. Comments here from our listeners. Nathan says that most fuel-burning generators don't actually vary their RPM and fuel-burning rate in response... I'm sorry. Let me do this again. So most fuel-burning generators don't actually vary their RPM and fuel-burning rate in response to how much electricity you're using. So whether you're using 10% or 100% of the electricity they're generating, they're burning the same amount of fuel the whole time. So unless you're specifically buying a larger generator just so you can keep your home theater going during a power outage, you shouldn't feel bad about it.
I do not know. I have no experience firsthand using a diesel or gas generator. I don't know.
That makes sense. I mean,
if it is just spinning at a constant RPM, that's going to use the same amount of fuel no matter what, if that's how it works.
It does. I mean, I'm thinking about my parents' generators, and when they, it does seem to like kick into higher gear every once in a while, but I don't know if that's because
But if it's only just a 2-step thing, maybe it's got 50% and
Yeah.
100%, and that's it, then as long
And
as
it's just keeping whatever the capacitors that are in their chart.
it could be that, yeah.
We are literally talking out of our
We do not know on
we're
this.
talking. We do not know
I'm
of which we
passing
speak.
along what Nathan said, and that's fine.
Nathan, you sound very knowledgeable, sir, and we believe every word out of your mouth.
So I don't what it says to me is if you are looking to purchase a diesel or gas generator, then this is something to look at in the specs, to read up on in the manual, to question the retailer or the manufacturer about, because there are probably differences from model to model. There are probably some that have multiple steps in between or something like that to be more efficient. But this is something to keep an eye on and something to ask about.
Yes.
That's what I would take away from it.
Right. And please, 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 if you're going to get a generator, have a certified electrician hook it up to your system.
Yes.
Because if you do not, and you try to, jury rig some way of getting it in there, you can send power back down the line, and as they're working on your lines, you can electrocute a perfectly innocent line worker. So do not do that. Have the certified electrician do your install, please. Andrew wanted to follow up regarding his question about possibly running Ethernet cables all over his house or trying to use Mocha with his existing coax cables. Instead, it turns out his internet service, Bell Fiber,
Just Fibe.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's just
I thought it
Fibe.
was a misspelling.
Nope.
Bell Fibe in Canada provides a mesh network option, so you can hardwire into any of the little mesh pods. He's getting a rock solid 500
megabits. Yeah. Half a gigabit.
megabits per second with that, so he's happy. No need to run more wires. There you go. He also wanted to weigh in on the new Paradigm Founder Series speakers, since Jason had asked about them last week. Andrew auditioned some Founder Series recently while he was trying out many, many different speakers in his search to upgrade his Paradigm Monitor V7 speakers, just like Jason.
Yeah.
The Founder Series sounded great, no question, but Andrew found it impossible to justify their price point, particularly over Paradigm's own Premier Series. So just something to consider. One man's opinion. He also agrees with us that the KEF R Series would be a similarly great choice, and the Martin Logan Motion Series is well worth a listen to if you want something just a little bit different. So there you go.
There you go. That is another person's take on it that does not disagree with ours, so it's sort of a reinforcement there. But yeah, we haven't heard the Founder Series for ourselves, and Andrew has, so happy to hear that. And yeah, I mean, honestly, once you get to very linear, accurate, neutral, transparent sounding speakers, how different you get as they continue to be linear and accurate and transparent is not a gigantic difference from series to series. So I'm not super shocked at that, gotta be honest.
No, and it's so strange because for me at least, there's a very strong, a very clear tipping point in like prices for speakers that I recommend, and which are of course speakers that I like. And what ends up happening is you get to this price point, which is depending.
That's somebody's question.
Yeah. Once you tip over that, I'm just like, the gains are so small. I mean, they are there, but they're so small that is it really truly worth it?
If we get to that person's question, that's a tease for later right there.
All right, we're teasing.
Yeah. That's what the episode's about.
It's a remote tease.
So we are about to start questions, but we are catching up from last week with Jay, who is not really so much question.
Right.
He just wanted our takes. Now, I do not want to spend a lot of time on these articles because they're just articles. It's not a pressing question, and we have lots of questions to get to. So let's not.
Jay would like to hear our thoughts on a couple of articles. So Sound and Vision has a write-up about KEF's new THX showroom theater, which was just about ready to write it as a pandemic hit, so they held off on opening it until now, which works out to coincide with their 60th anniversary. The showroom was constructed within the existing warehouse, so soundproofing was a big concern. The way it was constructed and then acoustically treated inside is what Jay found most interesting. The interior space ended up being 9,500 cubic feet, but it's a room within a room within a warehouse. So they built a room and then they built another whatever.
Yeah.
KEF said they wanted a very inviting and comfortable aesthetic and atmosphere, a room that you wouldn't want to leave, but without any compromises to the full sensory cinematic experience. This is 9,500 cubic feet. It doesn't look that big.
It's because it's quite tall, and there's 3 rows of seats in there. So yeah, it's big.
Yeah, it's whatever. I don't know. It feels like it needs more recliners. So the outer shell of the showroom was constructed within the warehouse with 2x8 framing and soundproofing for those walls, and the physical ceiling being 12 feet high. Then there's an air gap and another set of studs. However, the interior studs don't hold any drywall. They're really just all false walls to hold all of the acoustic treatment and in-wall and in-ceiling speakers. Then they're covered in stretched fabric, plus some wood panels and select spots for both looks and acoustics. All of the interior wall and ceiling bays are filled with thick insulation. Then some either have the wood panels or scatter plates on top to get the decay chimes exactly where they want across all frequencies. The ceiling is mostly diffusion within the hidden bays. The visible height of the ceiling is 11 feet. The floor has a thick pad over the concrete warehouse floor and then full carpet. The second row seating riser has slats cut into it and insulation inside to make it a large bass trap. Never sitting on that thing. They went for large couches instead of recliners to give it more of a living room feel. I'm just going to scroll past these pictures. It's a 9.10.6 configuration with 2 pairs of side surround speakers driven by an Acurus.
Yeah, Acurus.
Acurus Pre-Pro and Parasound amplifiers. They mentioned something Jay doesn't agree with, though, that he's pretty sure we wouldn't agree with either, which is that they went for the lowest crossover points that the in-wall speakers will allow. And the 10-inch in-wall subwoofers are deployed in such a way as they are independent front, side, and back subs, and only the 2 largest in-wall subs handle LFE only. Yeah, that's not what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
The screen is 160-inch Seymour Screen Excellence acoustically transparent woven model, and the projector is surprisingly humble, being a 6050 UB Epson. In the end, the total cost to construct the showroom and outfit it with all the speakers and gear came to about $500,000. Jay basically just wants our thoughts. He'd like to hear us talk through the design and construction choices and whether we think they maximize what could be done. Okay, so the stupid subwoofer choice, which is about the only thing I really care about in this entire thing. I mean, what they're clearly doing is trying to make what people would call full range.
Yep, full range speakers in every position.
Full range speakers in every position is all they're trying to do. And then they have the LFE, and that probably there's 2 subs, right? So they're either mid.
Yeah, the front wall, sort of the left corner and the right corner are like angled looking panels that span across the front left corner and the front right corner. And that is where they have embedded the 2 largest subs, is in those angled parts on the front wall. And those are the only 2 subs handling the dedicated LFE channel.
Why would you want to put one at the back of the room?
8 subwoofers. There are 8 more subwoofers in this room, but they are all basically paired up. So there's subwoofer on the back wall that's paired up with the surround backs, a couple of subs on each side wall. Those are paired up with the surround speakers, and then subs in the front that are paired up with the front speakers. So that's how they've done that, trying to have full range speakers in each position. Now, with 9,500 cubic feet, there's going to be a little bit less of a problem than in a smaller room, but this is still not a large enough room. It is still not full commercial theater cinema sized.
Sure.
That's still going to be an issue. So that isn't how I would have handled the bass management, and that is something.
At the very least, I would have put one of those 2 subs at the back of the room.
Sure.
I mean, it is a rectangular room.
But this doesn't seem like they did hire a company to do this installation. This doesn't seem like a company that's on board with the Harman research that has been around for many years at this point. But that is why you still have people within the CEDIA community and installers like Anthony Grimani who are still giving tutorials at all the CEDIA expos on this is a better way to set up subwoofers and crossovers, and they're still trying to get people, professional installers who have done this for decades, on board with this concept. So there's
okay, and I'm going to talk about it from an installer standpoint here. There's 2 things that happen when you become a professional in some industry. One thing is you learn how to do the thing that you do, and then you don't want to learn how to do it again. So once you start learning how to set up subwoofers the way that you've learned to set up subwoofers, trying to learn another way of setting up subwoofers is like relearning how to write. They just don't want to do it. Even if it's a better way, or learning new math. Even if it's a better way, doesn't make any difference. They're not interested in it. And second, if you tell an installer all you have to do is put 1 sub here, 1 sub there, and you don't have to measure, you don't have to do anything, you're done. You're like, well, what am I going to charge them for then? When I could be sitting here filling with the phase for 3 hours and charging them $300 an hour. I mean, I'm not saying they're doing that on purpose, but there's certainly in the back of somebody's mind, or maybe in the front, they are thinking to themselves, your way may be better, but my way is more costly for them.
I can put more time spent on it on the sheet there, and the bottom line gets higher.
And not only that, there's something to be said about the customer's perception. You're like, I just put a subwoofer there, put a subwoofer there, and they're like, well, did you do anything else? No. Nope. Don't have to, because of science. And they'll be like, yeah, what am I paying you for?
Now, on the construction of the room itself, I found it a little bit odd that you're going to go to the extent of building a room within a warehouse, but the room inside the room has nothing to do with the soundproofing. There is one soundproof room inside of this warehouse, and it is that 2x8 outer structure. Now, that's fine. I mean, as long as that's done properly, there's no reason why inside of a warehouse that can't block the noise from the outside and block the noise from the inside from getting out. Yeah. That's totally fine. So, but really, it's not, they described it that way, but it's not a room within a room. This is a single room with thick walls and then DIY absorption panels. That's what it is. Like, they built the framing, but that's all the second room is. It's not a room within a room.
Well, if you think about it, too, they're not even, basically they've got however thick their absorption panels are, and then they have a massive air gap behind it. So,
it's not even that massive. It's like 1 inch.
Well, 6 inch or something like that. Yeah. That's pretty big for what you would want to do in your own room. They may have 6 inches of insulation and then 6 inches of air gap, which is pretty nice. But you're right. It is just one room. Yeah. It's just one room with, and this is how I've seen many professionally constructed theater is done, which is essentially, they put stick framing up everywhere, and they just put fabric all over the wall, so they can put anything they want behind it.
But by having the very thick outer walls, the actual room, the room that is actually drywalled on the outside, by having the very thick walls, maybe that's staggered stud inside, because we can't really see. We can only see the outer plates in the photos. So if that's staggered studs inside, then that is like separated drywall on either side. That's full soundproof construction. That's great. What I do really love is this idea of having a physical 12-foot ceiling, but then an 11-foot visible ceiling, because behind that stretched fabric on the ceiling, you've got your in-ceiling speakers, so those don't actually have to be in-ceiling. Those are below the physical ceiling. They're just concealed by the fabric and within the cavities, and having all of the sound absorption that's up there and the diffusion. So I really like that. This is something that I like recommending if you have the ceiling height to spare, is basically having a drop ceiling. Having a drop ceiling. Yeah. That isn't the real ceiling, right? It's not just empty air above the drop ceiling. There's a layer of drywall above the drop ceiling. There's just that the drop ceiling is what you see, and above that is this cavity where you can run wires and put acoustic treatments and put speakers and put lighting and all that stuff, and you don't have to actually make holes in the drywall of the ceiling. So I like that. Now, very clearly, a huge part of this installation was having these racks that are on display, racks of all the gear, the huge number of amplifiers and everything that they have, because they went overboard on that, big time overboard, and so they love having that as a display. That's out in the hallway, and actually to see the backs, they described this in the article, to see the backs of the racks, you have to go into the bathroom, because they built like a whole mini house inside of this warehouse, basically, and you go into the bathroom, and that's where you can see the back end of the racks, and you can see the award-winning wire management, because that's what's really important. So anyway,
So somebody wants to come and do some award-winning wire management at my house. I'll be happy to take pictures of it, and you guys can, for exposure, because that's about all I could pay you for it.
I did think it was really weird that they went with an Epson 6050. Not that I think the Epson 6050 is a bad choice for anybody to purchase.
For this size screen, though?
For this size screen, for this size room, for this budget, I'm like, did you run out of money?
I think they ran out of money when they started buying the Parasound amps. They didn't get a discount on those things.
Something, because they are KEF, so I don't think they had to pay for their own speakers. I don't think that's where the budget went. That would be weird. Although maybe they had to include. I don't know how it all went down. But yeah, I thought it was a little bit weird on the choice of projector. I did find it interesting though. They went with Seymour Screen Excellence. There you go.
They did.
They got all this money. They got all this space, and that's the company they went with. So. I
agree with that too. I agree with that. I agree with.
Yes,
it was a little weird. The 6050 is a little strange. I was expecting like a Wolf or a Runco or something,
or at least a JVC.
At least. So the second article is Tom Norton's take on big TVs versus projectors. He seems to offer a fairly standard list of pros and cons for each. TVs can be pretty darn big and affordable now, 85 inches for under $2,000, or even 100 inches now, although those are still $20,000 or more, but still not as big and affordable as projection setup. So can you sit closer to get the same field of view? Sure, but you can perceive a difference in but you can perceive a difference sitting 8 or 9 feet from your display and speakers versus sitting at 12 or 15 feet away. Even if the field of view is the same, it just feels different. Oh, your feels. Is it hurting you in your feels? When you turn the lights off?
That's an actual biological thing on the focus of our eyes. So yeah, I agree with that.
I know. I just don't think it's as important as saving $20,000. It's difficult to hide an 85-inch TV when it's turned off. A projection setup can almost disappear if you use a retractable screen. TVs have the clear advantage for HDR peak brightness, absolute black levels, and usage when you have some ambient light. And projectors can be easier to service. Jay mostly wanted to share a different voice on the subject. What do we think of Tom Norton's take? I mean, I've already said what I believe, which is that direct view is the future, and everything else is. I think that projectors are on their way out. I don't think that they have many more years. I mean, they'll be around in some form or another, but the price of displays are just getting cheaper and cheaper. Micro LEDs are almost certainly going to be where we're going to be at very, very soon, in the next 10 years or so. So I really don't see projectors hanging on for very much longer. They are not keeping up technologically with the image quality that you can get from a direct view TV. And I think in the end, that's what's going to make the difference. I mean, yes, they're bigger for right now. And yes, they're cheaper as you get, the larger you get, comparatively. But those gaps are narrowing, while the gap between how good they can look, how bright they can be, how black they can be, that's just getting worse and worse for projectors. That gap is widening. So, the thing about the sitting closer, it's like that focal length, right? So your eyes, as you sit further back, your eyes, don't have to change focus as much, or maybe at all, depending on how far back you're sitting. But to me, I've never really run into an issue where I thought that, I've never had eye fatigue at home. I've never gotten headaches from watching TV. The last time I got a headache watching a movie was because of bad sound. It wasn't because of the image.
I mean, I will say there does seem to be something that just feels more relaxing in the eyes when you're watching from 15 feet or greater away. There's just sort of, for me, I do experience just a greater feeling of relaxation, and I think that might have to do with the focal length and the lens not having to adjust to my eye. You're at infinity focus. Your eyes, there's no more biological, physical movement in the lens of your eye once you're at 15 feet or greater. It just stays the same from that point on. So that might have something to do with it. There were a couple of things that Tom Norton didn't mention. I didn't think there was anything surprising in Tom Norton's take. That was all stuff that I
don't necessarily disagree with anything he's saying.
I agree with it all, and I think it's stuff that has already been mentioned before. There were no big surprises. I think there were two things that weren't mentioned that I think could be mentioned, which is, at the moment, flat panels are definitely superior for gaming. If you are on the cutting edge of gaming, there are no projectors that are doing 4K 120 with VRR right now, and there are flat panels that can do that. So as far as gaming goes, those have the advantage, and that wasn't mentioned. And the other one is, I was a little bit surprised he didn't talk at all about how, on a projection setup, if you have the money, you can have 4-way motorized masking.
Yes,
that is not something you can do on a flat panel. Now, on an OLED, when there are black bars, be they at the top and the bottom or be they on the sides, those black bars are every bit as black as the bezel, but you are only ever able to reduce the screen size on an OLED. Right. You cannot have a setup where this is the size I want for 16:9, and then my 2.35:1 is even bigger, or this is the size I want for regular HD TV, and then my IMAX experience is even bigger. The only way you could do that with a flat panel would be some weird scaling so that you have black bars most of the time and then sit real close. So, I mean, this is an advantage that projectors could have. So I was a little surprised you didn't mention that, because that's something that you can do.
I think we've all got, it really seems like I've finally gotten the industry to the point where they're realizing that that's just dumb. Let's not do that.
You're
anymore.
Just ticking off future questions left and right, but
I'm just telling you, I've never. I mean, you and I have argued about this, and you've come a little bit more around to my.
I like 4-way masking. If I could afford it, I would do it.
I'm not saying that it's not. I mean, I'm just there is no world in which I take a 16 by 9 screen and watch a smaller 16 by 9 image on it, just so that when I'm watching 2.35 to 1, that is larger than my
I totally
HDTV.
would. I would even go to the extent of having two screens, two 16 by 9 screens, but I would even go that far. So Tom and I disagree on that, but regardless, that is something I thought might have been mentioned by Tom Norton is masking, and it didn't come up in the article. So there we go.
All right, Mike. Mike has a setup in his house that's still using an old receiver, a Denon AVR 987.
It's going back a ways.
He's got a couple. That's got a couple of HDMI 1.1 inputs, and so even his Xbox One, the original version, he bypassed. Even for his Xbox One, he bypassed the receiver's HDMI input and relied on an optical audio connection. I've done that as well. This also worked fine for his cable box since he could plug that into the Xbox One.
Yeah.
But now Microsoft is killing off the TV interface, and moving forward, the new game systems won't have the optical audio outputs. He doesn't need the very latest 4K 120 support, but he wants a device that will let him plug in and switch between a few different HDMI sources and then output the audio from any of them via optical or a down-converted HDMI port that would work with the old Denon. So what do we suggest? So he needs a switch. He wants a switch that does conversion.
A switch with audio extraction. Yeah, that's really what you're in need of here. And I mean, the whole idea is, obviously, he's aware that if he were to buy an entirely new receiver, that could solve this, but he doesn't want to spend anywhere near that much money right now, which I can totally appreciate and understand.
I can understand that, too. It's funny, though. Every once in a while, we get a question. This question does have an answer that fulfills that.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, I'll get the question like, I want a bare bones receiver that will just do this, and this. And you're like, yeah, that doesn't exist.
But that's not at all what he's asking
that's
for.
That's not the case here. Now, yes, that's not the case.
Because it wasn't totally clear, I was reading through his email, it wasn't totally clear if he's planning to get like an Xbox Series X and that doesn't have the HDMI input anymore, because he was talking about wanting to have an HDMI input for his cable box, but then could still have optical audio from that. He was also talking about getting a new cable box, so there was a little bit of confusion on my part, Mike, just when I was going through exactly what it is you're looking for. But if this is literally just a case of you need like an HDMI port that is a pass-through, plus a second HDMI port that would like down convert the signal so that it would work with an older receiver like yours, there is from Sewell the Echo Split. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that because normally people think HD Fury right away as soon as you're talking about having like two different sync devices, right? The two different like AV receiver and the television having different HDMI capabilities, but wanting to connect them both at the same time. HD Fury can definitely do that, but for only $55, the Sewell Echo Split can do that. HDMI 2.0 level only. It's not an HDMI 2.1 device, but in Mike's case, he doesn't need 4K 120 and 8K stuff yet, so HDMI 2.0 would be fine. So I wanted to put that out there, but that is not a switch. That is one HDMI port goes into the Echo Split, and then the Echo Split passes through out to your display and also down converts the audio section, and in fact, like a down converted 720p or 1080p for an older AV receiver, if that's all it supports. But that is out there, so I wanted to mention it. But I think what you really need is an HDMI switch with audio extraction that comes out of an optical port. Now, normally I would have been pointing you to Sewell there as well, to one of their Siphon devices, but those are all sold out with no ETA on when new stock is arriving, and I think they're facing some kind of chip shortage too. And even over at Monoprice, they only have one available in their Blackbird lineup, and it's over $100, and seems like it's an older model, and they seem to be out of stock on those as well. So maybe that's exactly why Mike was asking, because if he went to Monoprice and was like, that seems expensive for what I want to do. So yeah, there is available on Amazon. There's a few of them, but one of them that's actually from a brand that I semi-trust. At least I've seen them and used them before, and they've been okay, which is a video, AVDIO, I don't know, AVEDIO, but yeah.
A video?
A video? I don't know. Whatever it is, their device works, all right? It's 4 HDMI 2.0 ports in, one HDMI 2.0 pass through out, and then you can down convert the audio to optical or to just stereo analog. And one thing that I like here is that the optical port will actually pass through Dolby Digital and DTS. A lot of them have an optical output audio extractor, but they only do PCM. They'll do up to 5.1 PCM, but it means you have to have done the decoding in your source device first, which for your Xbox is fine, but for your cable box might not be. Usually your cable box will not decode into 5.1 PCM and send that out. Usually the cable box is just sending out Dolby Digital 5.1. So at least this one will pass through the bit stream. It doesn't decode, but you don't need it to. It's just passing through the bit stream. So yeah, that's only $34. The Avidio, I don't know how to pronounce it. 4x1 HDMI switch with audio extractor. It's even like emblazoned on the top. And another nice feature of this one is it works with ARC. So even if you want to send audio from the apps built into your TV back downstream through Optical out to your receiver, it can do that too. So for $34, I don't think that's breaking the bank, and I don't think you can do a whole lot better on the price.
Yeah. The most of the reviews are really positive, except for the one guy who was trying to get it to do Dolby Atmos pass through. He's like,
it won't come out of an optical port. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what he was trying to do. I don't know.
I also know that Mike's Denon AVR 987 does not need an Atmos signal.
No,
that
it does not. So
true.
look, I just scanned the reviews just to see if there's anything there.
It does have a little remote because he was saying he's got a harmony. It would be nice if he could program the harmony so that he can manually just choose what HDMI input he wants on the switch. This comes with a little remote and can do that. So I think it checks all the boxes.
All right. Ryan has decided he wants a 130-inch 16:9 screen for the projector. He's been eyeing the JVC NX5. He's trying to figure out exactly where he would need to mount it. He plans on his seating, having his seating 11.5 feet from the screen. Mm-hmm. He used a Projector Central calculator with a screen size set to 130 inches, 16:9. It defaulted to having the projector 18 feet 10 inches away, but gave him a throw distance of a range anywhere between 14 foot 1 inch and 28 feet 3 inches. Mm-hmm. Could we help him better understand what exactly is recommending? Is anywhere within that throw distance range okay, but 1810 is optimal? Would he lose anything by having the projector farther back or gain anything by having it closer? Well, if that's the range, is 1810 like smack dab in the middle?
It's just in the middle. That's all it is. It is not a recommendation. And this is something I wanted to mention. The Projector Central throw distance calculator, which is a fantastic tool. I mean, any projector model, if you want to figure out what the range is available to you at a given screen size, or here's how far away my projector is going to be mounted, what screen sizes can I go to, what's the smallest and what's the largest. Sure. Fantastic resource, but it is not a recommendation. It's not recommending where you put it. It's just telling you the physical capabilities. So one thing I definitely wanted to point out, specific to the JVC projectors, is the JVC projectors, the native panels in those projectors are not a 16:9 aspect ratio. They are the genuine 4K aspect ratio, which is 4096 by 2160, not 3840 by 2160. They are wider than 16:9, and that is an option. You can choose what aspect ratio you're throwing in the Projector Central's calculator. So, I mean, he put it to 16:9. That's good, but it's something to be aware of because sometimes people are just going by the native and they're like, I calculated the screen size. Wait a second, it doesn't get as large as I thought it would, because they're just looking at the diagonal measurement and not realizing a little bit of the sides are cut off on anything that's 16:9 when you're dealing with a genuine 4K resolution. So to understand what you're looking at here, once you choose your screen size and you choose 130 inches diagonal 16:9 and you lock that in, there's little lock icons that you can put beside so that those don't change as you move the other sliders. So you lock in on 130 inches diagonal. The throw distance is just showing you the range of the zoom lens that is built in there. Further down the page, you'll also see the zoom range, and you'll notice that if you move the slider on the throw distance, the zoom range moves right along with it. If you move the slider on the zoom range, the throw distance slider moves right along with it, because that's what it's showing you. It's saying the 18 feet 10 inches is just when the zoom is right in the middle. So you can go to the telephoto end where the image is getting smaller, or you can go to the wide angle end where the image is getting larger. And this is just showing you that if you want to keep a 130-inch diagonal size, that throw distance is showing you that's the distance to the lens. If you want 130 inches, the lens of the projector has to be at least 14 feet 1 inch away. It cannot be any closer. If the lens of the projector is any closer to the screen, the image size will be smaller than 130 inches. If you want 130 inches, it has to be at least 14 feet 1 inch away. And then it can be as far away as 28 feet 3 inches. If it's any farther away than that, the image will be bigger than 130 inches. There's no way around it. That's just the range of the zoom lens. So that's what it's showing you there. Hope that makes sense.
That's right. And you want, if at all possible, you want it to be closer rather than further away. I mean,
you get more light. Yeah.
And that's what, as far as just, getting the best performance out of it you possibly can. You will get 130 inches either way, but there will be more light if you are closer.
Now, there's
and that gives you
one little thing to consider if you want to get down into the nitty-gritty of setting up a projection setup, which is if you have light-colored walls, if your walls are not dark and non-reflective, then if the projector is physically closer to the screen, so you're using the wide-angle part of the lens, that means more light is bouncing off your screen at a steeper angle onto your ceiling and walls. Whereas if the projector is physically farther away from the screen, that angle is narrower, so a little bit less light is bouncing off the screen at an angle and going to the walls and ceiling. In particular, if you're using a higher gain screen to try and get more light coming back to the audience, then having the light in a narrower path means that more light on a higher gain screen comes back to the audience, but then less light is coming out of the projector when it's physically far away. So it's almost as though in order to use the high gain screen to its best benefit, the projector needs to be physically farther away, but that means it's dimmer. So you're doing a trade-off there. So they just set it in the middle as the default because that's like a safe choice. It gives you latitude to either side. But if you're like, what's the minimum distance this lens needs to be? What's the maximum distance? That's what the throw distance is telling you.
All right. So yes, you can go further away than 1810. That's what it seems like
or closer.
He's asking. Yeah.
You can. Yeah, you can still get the 130-inch size.
You can still get the 130 inches anywhere.
Yeah, but do keep in mind, those distances are in reference to the lens. So remember, there's the entire
front
body
of the lens,
of the projector, not the middle, not where the post is. Like, if you put the post where you're going to hang it at 14 feet 1 inch, your screen size is going to be smaller than 130 now because the lens is closer than where the post goes to attach to the ceiling. Yeah,
that's right. Chris is trying to talk down a friend of his. His friend currently has a 7.2 system in a dedicated 15 by 20 foot room. Aperion Veris Grand and Intimus speakers all around with dual JTR subs and an Emotiva. JTR subs. And an Emotiva XMC2 with XP8 amps. He likes overkill.
15 by 20, that is unnecessary, but okay.
Could have powered it with a clock radio, but whatever.
Not
Chris's
quite.
friend is getting ready to expand to Atmos, but he said his plan is to hang Veris Grand bookshelf speakers from the ceiling. Chris thinks that's a bad idea. Those are not small speakers, and you, sir, are not lying. He tried to... I've had those speakers, and they are big, and they are heavy, and they are rear-ported, I'm pretty sure. So there's a lot of things... there's a lot of reasons I would not hang those speakers from the ceiling.
Indeed.
There's just so many reasons. I think all of the reasons. He tried to tell his friend to get Aperion's own in-ceiling speakers instead, but he doesn't seem to have any success in getting his friend to change his mind. So anything we can say that might talk his friend down from this plan? Well, your friend sounds sort of, kooky. So, maybe not.
I mean, on the plus side, it's free two-way shipping. So when your friend discovers that this was a bad
he's never going to be able to send these things back. There's no way to hang them from the ceiling that I can think of. They're rounded corners. They don't have a threaded insert on the back. I'm sure of that. So he's going to have to drill into the cabinet in order to hang these things. Okay. There's no way to clamp them because they're rounded.
Maybe he gets them, he unpacks them, and then realizes, there's not a good way to mount these on the ceiling.
No, there's just no. Okay, so what you tell your friend is, or you can have him listen to this, and I'm sorry I called you kooky, but whatever, dude, you're kooky. I own those speakers, and I paired them with SVS's prime elevation speakers, and they were perfect. And those are meant to go on the ceiling or on the wall, and they're angled, and you can put them wherever you want. I've also paired them with the prime satellite speakers,
Sure.
those work just fine too. And those are rear ported and can be mounted very easily from the ceiling if you really want to.
And if you don't want to
So-
mix brands, AVRant
Right.
has their own little wedge-shaped speakers, very similar to the SVS Prime Elevations. They are in the Novus series instead of the Varus Grand series, but they do have the AVRant A5 Novus wedge-shaped speakers, which they have mounts all over them. You can mount them in a multitude of ways. They are
Right.
one of the most flexible speakers in terms of how you can mount them and where you can put them. So if high up on your walls actually works better for your Atmos speakers, that's easy with these speakers. If mounting them directly on the ceiling works, that's easy. There are a multitude of ways to use the AVRant Novus A5 speakers. So all day long, those are $500 a pair, so it's less expensive than a pair of Varus Grand bookshelf speakers for sure. They are much better suited to Atmos duties. That is what they're for. Chris was mentioning, okay, AVRant has their own in-ceiling speakers, and his friend didn't want to do that. I'm actually in agreement with that. If you've soundproofed your room construction, I don't want to put holes in my ceiling that weren't there before. But these that you can mount on the ceiling, if he was going to mount the bookshelf speakers on the ceiling, then these are much, much easier. So that is definitely my recommendation. I totally agree the Prime Elevations would be great too, but if you just want to stick with AVRant, they've got an option.
You literally cannot. Don't even order the Varus Grands. You cannot mount those
Right.
to the ceiling. There's no way I can imagine that you can do that without building a specialized structure where they would just sit into like some sort of holder, which would be awful. So yeah, don't waste your time and money trying to do this. And sonically, you're not going to hear a difference anyways. So
definitely.
Also, don't buy any more amps.
I mean, if he's going to add more speakers, he has to because he has a pre-pro, not a receiver. So there's no option.
You need like 25 watts per overhead speaker.
If you're sticking with Emotiva, definitely go Base X. You do not need another XPA. That is for sure.
Eric's theater is in a detached converted garage. After listening to us for a while now, he's realized he'll be better off spending his limited budget on improving the room itself rather than chasing after a speaker upgrade. So,
just looking on YouTube at first, we're just seeing it's a detached garage. Where the car would normally go in, you open that up, and hey, look, there's a couch and a big old projection screen in there instead. No room for a car.
So he's working with a very tight budget, so when it comes to making DIY panels, could he get away with just getting bats of insulation and then wrapping them with some fabric and hanging them on the walls, no frames of any kind? In theory,
right,
you could.
Yeah.
If you could make it stand up and not slowly compress down into a ball at the bottom of whatever
and
it was.
There is some stuff we'll talk about in a moment that can help on that front.
But generally speaking, the reason that we don't recommend the pink insulation or the the bats of insulation that you just get from Home Depot or whatever is because it's very hard to work with in comparison to the rigid fiberglass or the rock wool that you can get.
If you do with the rock wool insulation, or if you do it with like Owens Corning 703, which is a more rigid fiberglass insulation, then as far as it just sagging over time, less of a concern. And then what I would definitely recommend, because this can be done. You can make panels that don't have a wood or metal frame around them. It's really just a bat of insulation and then fabric over it. But you would want to harden the edges and the corners especially.
And that's what places like who used to sell the sub dude, the little
Oralex?
platform. Oralex does. Mm-hmm. All of their panels are just basically insulation that has hardened, rounded, beveled edges. That's the only, that's all. And then they wrap it in fabric and glue the fabric to the back of it. So that if you can harden the edges, that'll be fine. But otherwise, I just kicked my
something
camera.
moved like crazy. Yeah.
Sorry, I gotta fix that.
There is a sort of a mastic resin that's called No Frame, which is available. I mean, they even market it for this purpose of hardening the edges of insulation. And it's not crazy expensive, but you can go even cheaper by just getting the generic stuff that would just go, if you go into a hardware store and ask them for duct butter, it is just a mastic. Now, duct butter is what you use on ducting when you aren't using aluminum tape. Aluminum tape is usually the better solution, but if you want to go even cheaper, they use duct butter, and it is just a mastic coating that goes on there and hardens, and that works perfectly fine. You can buy a gigantic gallon jug of it for like $25, and you can make all the panels you want and harden their edges.
So you would just put this on the edge?
You put it on the edge, put a little extra on the corners. You just put it on there with a paintbrush. There's not much to it. And in fact, duct butter is used all the time by insulation installers when, for example, like they make a cut in it and then they want to seal that cut back up, right? They make a cut to put a pipe through the insulation and then they want to seal it back up. This is what they use. This is what they use to seal it back up because it's cheap and it hardens and it works thermally as well. There's no concerns on that front. So, yeah, duct butter is a cheap way to harden the edges. You might want to be a little bit careful on applying it because it is goopy stuff that hardens. So you want to make sure you're...
So what they must do for those beveled edges, they must like almost dip the edges all the way in it and then shave them.
They might
afterwards.
Yeah. They probably cut them a little bit to shape and then dip it and then probably sand it afterwards. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Now the other thing is though, when you do this, how do you wrap them in fabric? Because you got nowhere to secure the fabric on the back, which means you basically have to make a bag, which means you're using more fabric than if you had a frame. So that's something to consider, because depending on the fabric you're using, that might negate some of the cost by having to use almost twice as much fabric for each panel in order to make a bag to put on there, and then to get that bag to not appear saggy in any way. It's like there's effort that goes into doing this. So the whole reason I mention that is because if you go to Acoustimac, they just have the DIY kits, which if you buy your own insulation, you can just get the frame and the fabric, which is already cut to size, and the frame is already cut to size, and you just have to assemble it. But even if you get the ones that come with insulation in them, they're $55 per panel for the 4-inch thick, 2 foot by 4 foot. That's with fabric already cut, that's with a frame already cut, and that's with the insulation is $55. And I'm like, it's not bad. And plus, once you have a frame, now it's much easier to have an air gap behind it instead of just relying on like a sawtooth hanger to just dig into the back of your fabric and insulation and hang the panels that way. One other thing is, if you are just going to get raw insulation, no frame, like you want it to be 4 inches thick, and that's not insubstantial in its weight. So hanging it just on sawtooth hangers, like, I'm not a huge fan of doing the raw insulation. That's what I'm driving at. So it can be done. This is how you would do it with the mastic and with a bag for the fabric instead and sawtooth hangers. It can be done. It is a little bit cheaper, but there's effort involved. There's time involved. There's more fabric involved, and hanging it is harder, and you want them to be 4 inches thick. So I like the DIY kits. I think they're worth a little bit extra money per panel.
So the garage is not insulated and the roof is fully exposed on the inside. Yeah, so scroll back up to that Kef theater, because you've got basically got that.
Yeah.
What
well,
you've got.
Except he doesn't have a whole shell outside of this as well.
No, he doesn't. But but your beams are exposed here.
Yep.
So does it make sense to add acoustic panels to this space? I mean, we've seen this before, and
sure,
just putting insulation up there, like just literally raw insulation, is and then not the stuff with the paperbacks.
No,
just putting the raw insulation up there, and then just getting fabric and stapling it along there. You basically have a massive bass trap at the top of your ceiling. I would just now this is where you get the raw insulation without the paper backing. You put it up there, then you line the entire thing with acoustically transparent cloth, and you staple it down, or you tack it down, or you glue it down. It doesn't make it. You're just trying to keep the insulation from falling on your head. That's all you're trying to do. Just keep it up there, and
then maybe
it would make
visually
this whole
hide
thing
it a little bit with some fabric.
Yeah, I mean, the most expensive part will be the fabric.
Yeah,
to do this, but this would transform the sound of your theater significantly.
Yes. Does it make sense? Even more so. That's my answer there. This is not a detriment. This is a even more so it makes sense. I did want to mention one thing though, which is like there's an image here where he's got the hose of a portable air conditioner hanging out the window. I'm like, are you actually trying to make the inside of this uninsulated garage comfortable? I mean, I'm sure he's trying to make it at least livable.
That thing must be like cranking, because this would also help with that.
Or in the winter, that's going to be an issue too. The thing is, converting a detached uninsulated garage into like an air conditioned, like I'm not talking colder, I'm just meaning like it's like an interior space, that's not a trivial thing. And even just putting the insulation up into these exposed ceiling rafters, there's a little bit of concern that you need to have. If we actually go back to the shot of the outside of this detached garage, we can see there is a one of those whirlybird, the metal whirlybird things up there. Now, that is a vent. That is a roof vent. And what happens is on the eaves that are overhanging the outside of the building, somewhere along those eaves will be a soffit vent. And the whole idea of any attic or any exposed roof is that the sheathing, the plywood or the OSB that is physically making the roof, other than the what do you call them? Roof, not tiles. What's the word I'm looking for here? Shingles. Shingles is the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Other than those, the actual structure is like a piece of plywood or OSB. That is supposed to be the same temperature outside and in. That's why we have an attic. It's really important. It means that air needs to be able to get in through the soffit vents that are within those eaves. There'll be holes cut in there somewhere. And it needs to be able to get to the inside part of this. And that air needs to be able to circulate and get out of the vent. So you've got a whirlybird, that's your vent, which means that you don't have a tremendous amount of airflow going across the entire roof in here. And of course they don't, because it was meant to be an uninsulated exposed space. You're just supposed to be able to have air come in through the soffit vents and get out of that whirlybird. If you are going to fully convert this, if you're just going to leave it more or less as it is and just throw some insulation up in that ceiling for acoustic purposes, all you really need to do there is make sure that air can still get in through those soffit vents. Don't block the soffit vents with any insulation down by where the eaves would go out on the side walls. And make sure that air can still circulate and get to that whirlybird. So in other words, probably don't line the entire ceiling. Make sure air can still get in and still get back out. But that can be fairly simple with just some plastic baffles. You go to Home Depot or Lowe's, you're just looking for rafter vent baffles. They're like plastic. They're super cheap. And just make sure that's in between the actual plywood and where the insulation goes. If you're going to fully convert this space, you're almost certainly going to want to put in a ridge vent. That's right up at the top. The ridge vent would go across like the entire span of the roof.
Right.
That's not inconsequential, because if we're going to insulate that entire ceiling and close it in and actually convert this garage into an interior living space, air's got to be able to get in through all the soffit openings in the bottom. In fact, you probably want to end up putting more soffit vent openings along the bottom part of the roof. That air has to be able to get up to that ridge vent and keep the sheathing of your roof the same temperature inside and out. When cold meets hot, you get mold and rot. That's the rhyme that helps you remember what's going on when it comes to construction. You do not want warm air meeting cold air. So there has to be a baffle in between and then the insulation. Check your local area. Some local areas need a vapor barrier as well, or a spray foam to give you a full thermal break. So that's got to be a little bit careful on. But if it's all still going to essentially be exposed as it is now, then you can just put in some plastic to make sure there's a separation between the sheathing and the insulation. Yeah. Wanted to mention that, though.
All right. You definitely need to talk to a contractor.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me. All right. John. Right? Yes.
Yep.
John.
First
up, John wanted to mention that about 9 months ago, he wrote us to ask if anything could be done about his screen burning on his LG B7 OLED. He eventually decided to buy a new Sony X950H LCD TV for his lounge, but he still had the B7 on hand, and that popped up the message that his power supply needed to be replaced, essentially a recall, and to get in contact with customer service to arrange a free replacement.
Yeah, we heard about that from Bob in the Philippines. Yeah, the exact same thing. So this is actually John's in the UK, so they had the same thing popped up on his.
Us, we're all international over here. So an authorized technician came to his house, and while he was there, John mentioned the screen burning to him. Miraculously, the technician was able to get the OLED panel replaced for him under warranty. So now John has a new Sony for the lounge and a virtually new OLED, which he moved to his study. He also put a Denon X2400H with a 5.1 speaker system in there, along with a Sony X800 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. So his question is, with his 7.1 setup in the lounge, his receiver would say Atmos on the front panel, but in his study, he's only ever seen Dolby Digital Plus. It never says Atmos. Is that because the B7 OLED only has regular ARC and not eARC? He's looked through the settings and nothing is jumping out at him. Why isn't he getting an Atmos signal anymore? Because you don't have Atmos speakers.
You have a 5.1 setup.
system.
That is the entirety of the culprit.
The two surround back speakers are considered in your 7.1 system are considered Atmos speakers, even though we've been around forever. Atmos said, "No, those are ours." 5.1, if you have 5.1 or less, and I've had a question like this similarly on that have been sent to me directly from AV Gadgets, and then also asked on the website, and I can't get enough information from the dude to quite figure out what his problem is. But he keeps saying that he sees Atmos, but he can't get Atmos. And I'm like, how many speakers you got, man? Because if you don't have enough speakers, it's not going to work. And if you're seeing Atmos, then you're getting Atmos. So I'm not really sure what's going on. But yes, you can't get Atmos if you do not have enough speakers for Atmos, and you do not.
And 5.1 is not enough. Yeah, so you're seeing the correct thing. In fact, it's a little bit reassuring because it's telling you, we recognize you don't have more than 5.1 speakers, so we are sending the correct type of bit stream for your configuration of speakers. That's a little bit, that's good to see. You do have an X2400H, so that's old enough. It doesn't have Dolby Atmos height virtualization, the thing where it tries to virtually create phantom overhead speakers from the 5.1 physical speakers that you have. You don't have that processing in an X2400H, so this is exactly what it should be. You should be seeing 5.1 codecs no matter what is playing, because that is the configuration of speakers that you have. Now, you could lie to your AV receiver. You could go into the ampersine and tell it that I don't have 5.1, I have 7.1, but then just not physically connect any either surround back or height speakers of any kind.
I don't think that the room correction would run.
The room correction won't run, but you could still do it manually, just without any room correction on. If you turn Odyssey off, you could lie to it and say that you have 7 speakers and just physically only connect 5, and then the front panel will start saying Atmos again, but that means your room correction is off and you are at that point actually missing some sounds, because some sounds would be directed out of the 2 speakers that you lied about and aren't physically there. So, you don't need to see Atmos on the front panel. You've got what you should have.
Right. Adam, this might be a good timing with the Sofabaton X1 Kickstarter happening right now. Adam saw that Kickstarter as well as $50 Sofabaton U1. He isn't happy with any of his current remotes. His Roku remote is too small and doesn't have enough functions. He had high hopes for the triangular NVIDIA Shield remote, but it isn't as good as he hoped, and he doesn't like that one either. The remote that came with his Outlaw Audio Pre-Pro is laggy, and it's too big. This one's too big. This one's too small. This one's too triangular. He's looking for that just right one. The remote he used to like best was the one that came with his Onkyo receiver. With that, you could easily turn on the TV, control every function of the receiver, and then switch over to control a source device. It was a nice size and it responded quickly and consistently. But he doesn't have that Onkyo anymore. So do we think either of the Sofabaton models will satisfy him? He doesn't want to spend more than $100 on a remote. Well, if you don't want to spend more than $100 on a remote, then you better kickstart that thing.
And that's why he's asking right now.
Yeah. So I mean, the interface on the Sofabaton U1, I have not had experience with. Rob, how do you like it?
Okay, yeah. Why don't I go ahead and dig into the U1 a little bit, because it is actually, in a couple of ways, not quite as good as I had hoped, but then in a couple of particular ways, more capable than what the description would leave you to believe. So, the things that might make me say no to the U1, it is only $50, so it's definitely very affordable. Now, right away, just the feel of the plastic, it's quite a nice size. It fits very nicely in the hand. It's a nice weight. All of those are positives. But the plastic itself, do you ever remember getting like genuine action figures, G.I. Joes or something like that, and then feeling the knockoff action figures and how the plastic was obviously much thinner and a bit more brittle and that type of, just the feel of the plastic? Yeah, the U1's got a bit of that. Just the feel of the plastic. It's like, yeah, that's the thinner, more brittle plastic. Now look, they're saving money because they only charge $50 for the thing. It is not poorly made in any way. I think this is about as good as you can do with cheap plastic. I'll put it that way, but it feels like cheap plastic. Okay. Now, as mentioned before, you've got the scroll wheel. All it does is select devices on the front. That is all you do. All you have is the list of devices. It's very easy to set up in the app. The remote just connects to your phone via Bluetooth. And then if you are actually controlling a Bluetooth device with the remote directly, it can do that. It'll disconnect from the app and connect to whatever Bluetooth device. But that's all you get, is a list of devices. And this is not a button, so you just scroll to what device you want to control. Now, what's interesting, at the very top, there's one little button labeled TV. Now that is a universal macro button. That button does the same thing no matter what device you've scrolled to on the screen. Right? You can scroll to any device, be controlling any device. This little TV button at the top always does the same thing, no matter what device you've selected. So that's like the universal macro. You can program in whatever macro you want. No matter what else is going on, you push that button, it always does the same thing. But all the other buttons on the U1 remote are fully programmable. And when I say fully programmable, it's more programmable than what the description leads you to believe. When you put in a device, you go through the app and you enter a device, here's my TV, here's my receiver, whatever it is, that's all fine. But then you can go back into the app and you can choose every single one of the buttons on the face of this remote, and you can either reprogram it to a single function, and that single function can be from any device that you've entered. So you can actually have this thing, you've scrolled up on the screen and you say, okay, right now I'm controlling my Apple TV, but half the buttons don't control the Apple TV. Half the buttons you can reprogram to control other devices. You're totally free to do that. Also, every single button on this remote can be a macro. Which is like not clear in the description at all. Every single button for every single device can be a macro if you want it to be. So here's where, if you get creative, you can start to do a whole bunch of stuff, because the downside of the U1 remote, he was like, with that on-kill remote I used to have, I could control every function of my receiver. And I'm like, yeah, that's where the U1 gets trickier, because there are no soft buttons. You cannot program buttons with a name that is unique to that button and see it on the screen and control it that way like you can on a Harmony. You can map any of the functions of the remotes, and it's all on the database, and the database they have has more functions than the remote that came with your device, right? Like it'll have discrete on and off codes very often that aren't physically on the remote that came with your device. It'll have discrete input selection buttons in the database that aren't necessarily on the remote that came with your device. So that stuff might be in the database, but you have to map those functions to one of the buttons that exists, right? So it doesn't have a label, right? Maybe you use the number pad to be your HDMI 1 through 8 or something like that. It could make sense, but there's no label to indicate that to you. So if you get creative, one of the things you could do is you could say, well, I don't just have one AV receiver. You program it that I have two. Now, the first one, you label it, and all the buttons that are on the face, the labels make sense and it lines up with what you would think they are. But the second instance of that same AV receiver that you programmed into the remote, that can have all your discrete input codes or something like that. And that you can actually hide any device from the screen. In the app, you can say, just hide this device, make it so it doesn't show up on the scroll wheel, but it still exists. The programming is still in there. It just doesn't show up on the scroll wheel. So you can have all these hidden commands that are programmed there, and then on the device that you actually do see, and you actually in the menu, all of these buttons could be macros, right? So it could be like, okay, when I press power on this, it doesn't just send power on, it sends power on and the input switching command on my television and on my AV receiver. Like, you can get very creative with it. But it's not necessarily intuitive because things aren't labeled. So if that's the type of programming you like to get into, the U1 is more capable than I thought it was. You can do a heck of a lot, but sometimes you got to think it through. Sometimes you got to be a little bit tricksy with how you program it, and then you kind of have to remember, okay, what did I map these buttons to? You can always look it up in the app, but if you're just looking at the physical remote itself, it's not necessarily going to be obvious. You're only going to see what's here. That's the labels you've got. There's no custom labels. With the X1, we don't know yet. We don't know how customizable the labels are. Like, we know the buttons are going to be just as customizable as the U1. That's obvious. We know they actually have an activity-based system now. So it's not you remembering to program a certain button as a macro. It's like the activities are definitely listed right there on the X1 screen. But after you've activated an activity, we don't know yet. We don't know what the user interface looks like after you've activated an activity. Does it switch to a bunch of soft buttons that you can scroll through on the scroll wheel? That's kind of what we hope it does. That's what we're hoping it'll do, because then you can have custom soft buttons.
It doesn't seem like they have a really good handle over there on how to make a really good UI yet.
Without a
At least.
touchscreen, yeah.
Yeah.
We aren't sure. I mean, what I can say for sure, and this is something I kind of want to stress, this is just an IR remote and a Bluetooth remote. This will control Bluetooth devices as well, but it's primarily an IR remote. It doesn't have a hub. You know, the IR just comes out the front of the U1 remote.
Got to point to that stuff.
You got to point at that stuff, and it's not a particularly strong IR output that it has. It's kind of weak. It's definitely not as strong as the IR, blasters that were built into Harmony remotes. You gotta point it right at what you want to control. And if you've got sunlight streaming in, or if you're far away, like with a lot of the Harmonies, you could like point it at a white ceiling, and it was just blasting so much IR, it would reflect around your room and still work. Not the case with the Sofabaton U1. This you gotta point at the device. It's not super strong IR. The X1's gonna be better than that. That's guaranteed, because first of all, it has a hub, and even if the hub isn't reaching, it's got little extender IRs that come with it, 3 of them. So you're gonna have better IR control. The X1 will also control things over Wi-Fi in addition to Bluetooth and IR, so it has more capability there. But yeah, it is still a question mark just how customizable the labels of the X1 are going to be, where we have hopes, but we don't know. So bottom line, I think one of these Sofabaton, I mean, at the moment, what else are we going to say? The Sofabaton has a higher likelihood of working for you than any other universal remote that's still being manufactured. We can say that pretty confidently. Like I say, I don't think there's a huge risk in going ahead and backing the Kickstarter while you can still get it for $95, because, it's going to be on Amazon selling for $190. You can almost certainly sell it to somebody, maybe just at what it cost you, but I don't see a huge amount of risk there. Yeah, I think that basically covers it. And given some more details on the U1 that I haven't heard other people talking about.
Okay. David had a very clean DIY setup with custom cabinets that he built to surround his flat panel and house his in-wall Yamaha speakers. But he decided he wanted a projection setup, so he went to work. And you'll see some pictures on YouTube.
So showing the before, which is very clean and very modern looking. And these are the pictures that David gave permission for Tom to use. Yes. And he might, because they are colorful and interesting looking.
They are. So if you've seen Brewster's Millions, which if you were my age, you have seen it. And he's trying to get that room that he could die in or whatever. This is a room that, whatever. This looks like that. It's got a big red carpet on the floor, a gray front wall, gray wood floor, and white walls with these large, long, black acoustic panels on the walls, the rectangular panels on the walls. And in the front of the wall, he has his TV, and around his TV, there is a black L going across the top with a short side on the right, and then a white L with the short side on the left, and then going across the bottom. Yep. And in the white L is the left speaker and the center speaker, which is below the TV, and then on the black L, the small section has the right speaker. And
there is Godzilla standing guard on top of a SVS cylinder sub. That's what that sure looks like there. So
it does. I don't see surround speakers, but I assume they're here someplace.
I think they're in the soffit above his seat. I think they're embedded into that soffit.
Yeah, maybe.
I think that's what's going on. But then he sort of tore apart his front wall a little bit. He certainly took down the flat panel that was there and tore it apart a little bit. So we see a bit of that construction going on.
Yeah, and then he put an acoustically transparent screen. He put, I'm hoping, acoustically transparent curtains on either side, and then filled the entire back of it with insulation except for where the speaker was.
That's right.
So the picture of when the screen was down doesn't show all the insulation. He ended up installing basically every available space is filled with insulation behind the screen now. If you think of what I just said, like the 2 L's, kind of like put your hands together like you were like framing a movie thing. You see people do that. Right. It's like that. He just essentially mounted the screen onto that and put the insulation in the space behind it. Yeah. That was in between the L's. So it's actually a pretty... the way he had this thing set up, it almost was like he was planning on putting a projection screen there someday. Because it really worked out pretty well for him.
It did.
The room is 12 feet front to back, 18 feet wide, with his seats against the back wall. He's about 11 feet from eyes to screen. He likes to keep the cost down, so he went with Silver Ticket's woven acoustically transparent screen in the 120-inch size. He's very happy with it. With the actual content playing, he says he needs to get within 8 feet to start seeing the weave, so no complaints at all. Obviously, he needs to run his room correction again, but should he do so with the projector on and its fan noise present. He's got a Marantz SR5011, so he really does need a display connected just to proceed through the Odyssey process, a definite disadvantage of that tiny porthole front display. But should he temporarily bring in a small TV so that the projector fan noise isn't present? I wouldn't worry about that one iota.
Yeah, it's not really necessary, but this is actually an opportunity to mention during the Odyssey setup. So it's going to play its chirps, right, out of one speaker at a time. It plays the chirp, tweet, 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 tweet that it does. And then there's a moment of silence going on before it goes to the next speaker. It's actually very important that you don't make additional noise during that moment of silence in between, because it is still listening with the microphone and it is actually taking in the ambient background noise during that time of silence. So if there is a constant low fan noise going at all times, that's actually okay, because it will recognize that that's just part of the ambient background noise. It's constant. It's always there. It's not a random fluctuating noise. So having that low fan noise from the projector really isn't a problem. The system is smart enough to recognize that as part of just the ambient background noise of the room. So that's okay. You can have the projector on.
So what about Wi-Fi? Does that do that as well?
Oh, sorry. Skype cut out. I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I said, what about Wi-Fi? What about Wi-Fi? Does that do that as well?
I don't know how much it's listening in between. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But he's got a Marantz. Odyssey does. I know. I just was curious.
So initially he didn't want to remove the custom cabinets he had built on his front wall, but the Yamaha center speaker that is embedded along the bottom is too low behind his new screen. So he secured a BIC V52 speaker where his flat panel used to be. The Yamaha in-wall left and right speakers are not a good match with the BIC center, and now he's willing to cut away at least a portion of the custom cabinets if it means he can install a better front speakers. He does not want in-walls. They're all in-walls.
Yeah, well, like, he doesn't want in-walls in the actual wall, right? So if we see,
he wants them in the thing.
Yeah, so there's the gray physical wall. He doesn't want to install any speakers in that, but if they're within the sort of, cabinet that he's built in front of the physical wall, that's okay. But yeah, he doesn't want actual in-wall.
No, I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got that. So he has very limited space behind the screen, so whatever speakers go back there, they need to be 7 inches deep or less. So should he get another pair of BIC V52 speakers? I mean, as much as I think that BIC are a fine brand to get for people who are on a budget and their first foray into home theater, I think you are well beyond that level, sir. And as much as I know you want to save money, and I would love you to save money as well, I feel like sound quality wise, this would not be a good match. So he says that wouldn't cost too much, obviously. Or could we give him suggestions for speakers that would be better and would physically fit? He'd like some options starting with the lowest price and going up to whatever we think is reasonable. Well, look at that. Tom already wrote an article at AV Gadgets called Best On-Wall Speakers.
Yep.
So I went through essentially Amazon and a couple other places where you can get some very good on-wall speakers that are thin. And it talks about how to mount them. It talks about how some their sound quality issues and or sound quality and what to expect. There's a lot of them out there. I mean, you can spend a lot of them. I mean, you can go up the legacy audio and get the ones that
you get the pixels
Ted
or
has.
the silhouettes. Yeah.
Yeah, they can get real expensive. RBH has some, I think, or maybe they don't anymore. I don't know.
They're kind of still around. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot that are there, and even those ELAC ones that are available, right? They have the ELAC, the OW.
Yeah, the debut 2.0. Yeah, that's definitely going to be one to consider.
That would be like probably where I would start looking. I would start looking around there, and then price my way up from there. I would not. I think you're too mature. I think you're too too mature in your AV journey to be running big speakers in a theater that looks like this. I just think it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned sort of going from low cost to higher cost. There's a whole bunch that are all right around $250 each, like really close to that price point. There's a whole bunch that are in there. There are a few that aren't included in the article that Tom posted on AV Gadgets. Maybe he'll revise it and add some more, but he'd usually like to keep the link to the articles not too long. But one that I do stand behind when you need something that's got good efficiency, Klipsch's reference Premier on-wall speakers really are quite good. I'm really quite a fan of those. But those are the $250 each for the smallest version. They have 3 sizes, goes up to $650 each for the largest one, and there's one right in the middle at about $400 each. But you don't need anything. You're at a maximum 11 feet away from these things. So the $250 ones would be absolutely fine. Those would be the RP140D, I believe, is the model number out of those. Aperion. We talked about them a little bit in a previous question there, but they do have their Novus series slim on-wall speakers. So that's $275 each, but like I say, really close to the same price point. But those would definitely be an option. That's one I really quite like. They're very nice looks as well. So if you ever did redo things and ended up with speakers visible or went back to flat panel or whatever, having those Novus slim speakers would fit into the type of aesthetic that you have. So I think that might be a very nice choice. Good sound quality on those as well. Golden Ear has their Super Sats. Those have been around for a while. If you want sort of folded ribbon tweeter design, that is an option. Those are $300 each, so a little bit more expensive that we got into there. Martin Logan also has on-walls in their Motion series. They got the Motion 4 Eyes, which are $250 each. Folded
Weird.
ribbon tweeter in those. Similar design. So, yeah, that's a whole bunch in there. So I think you're probably looking at like the ELACs at the lower price, because those are what, $275 for a pair? For the
Yeah, I'm
ELAC,
just looking them up right now.
DB 2.0?
Yeah, $275 a pair. Well, that's B stock.
Oh, okay.
Let me look. Yeah,
They're not $250 each though. They're below that. So I think that's
no.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the less expensive ones would be the ELACs. You've got all these $250 each choices.
The regular price is $330 a pair, but even on the
They pretty
ELAC
much never
website
sell
right
for
now,
that.
they're $260 a pair right now.
Okay.
So
okay. Even better. So those in there, all the $250 choices, and then one that's not going to be as expensive as the Legacy and the RBH, because we mentioned those are at the really high price range. I'm not sure if you want to go that much when you're saying a priority is saving money, but Ascend Acoustics does have their Luna speakers. Those are a 6-inch deep on-wall flush mountable speaker. Those are $575 each or $580 each if you get the single. So yeah, that's in between those price-wise. It's twice the price of all the 250s, a little bit more than twice the price, but not as expensive as the Legacy or RBH. That's a true ribbon tweeter, the RAL ribbon tweeter built into the Lunas. So that is an option as well. Something out of there is going to float your boat. If I had to take a choice, given the aesthetics and everything, I'd go for those Novus speakers. But that's only if you want to pay that much. They are $275 each.
Okay. Where are we time-wise? We're doing okay. Andrew. This is Brenda's husband and Tara's dad.
That's right.
Because he doesn't have a real name. Brenda's husband has the monoprice monolith HDP1 Pre-Pro. He's got 16 channels to work with. The HDP1 uses DRAC, and it received the update for DRAC Live bass control, which is good, I guess. That's DRAC's version of sound field management, so it can fully assign independent levels, delays, and EQs for each sub, but all calculated to deliver uniform, even bass across the entire seating area. So he's got 7.4.4 configuration, and those really are 4 independent subwoofer signals in this setup. Then he also has a signal going to a mini DSP 2x4, which he uses to control his tactile transducers. But now he's starting playing around with Oro 3D, and he likes the Oromatic Up Mixer. Tara's dad needs to get another hobby, okay? Let me just throw that out there to begin with, Tara's dad. Tara's dad needs to start, rock climbing or cycling or doing some lawn maintenance. Something, dude. You just get out of the home theater. Getting weird. He can label his 4 overhead speakers, top front and top rear positions, as front heights and rear heights. Using those labels gives him a setup that works with all 3 immersive audio formats. But he wants that voice of God channel now. So here's the idea he's floating. At least we think that's what he's saying, since the names he used for the various speaker positions in his email was super confusing. So Brenda, talk to your husband about proofreading.
Because he, just to let you know, because I tried my best to understand, but he had some things where he called them top heights, and I'm like, I don't know what a top height speaker is. And then he never mentioned.
Oh, no.
He never mentioned surround heights, but he did mention wanting to have exactly what Oro recommends. And I'm like, well, that would include surround heights, but he never mentioned them. And then he was talking about
middles,
the voice.
Right?
Yeah, well, he was talking about the voice of God speaker, but he was sometimes referring to it as a center height. I'm like, that is even more confusing because there really is a channel called center height, and that is part of Oro. So I was very confused, Andrew. I'm like, I tried my best. I think I got in the ballpark of what you were talking about. I certainly got somewhere in the ballpark, right? Yeah, I'll let Tom read the rest of what I wrote trying to parse this out. If we're way off base, then we'll.
So if I'm way off base, it's because Rob wrote it wrong. Here we go.
Right.
The HTP1 doesn't do a single voice of God. Technically, the name is top surround. Instead, you have top middle speakers, and it will play those together in mono during oral 3D playback to create the voice of God channel.
Which is how it should be done by every other receiver.
They're the only ones that are doing it right, as far as we're concerned.
Pretty
but
much,
let's go on. It sounds as though he doesn't really want to put another pair of speakers in his ceiling directly overhead, but he could put front height and rear height speakers on his front and back walls. Then he's thinking he could wire the current top front and top rear speakers together in series to create top middle channels. So in the end, he'd have a 7.4.6 configuration. So that much is clear. So it sounds like what he wants to do is he's got ceiling speakers and he wants to add speakers on the front and back walls in order to, I don't know what he's trying to do. It's crazy.
Well, yeah, like instead of having
channels. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Instead of having speakers on, speakers on the front wall, front heights, speakers on the back wall, rear heights, and then instead of actually having top middles in the ceiling directly overhead, he's already got four speakers in the ceiling, so he's just going to wire the two on the left together and call that the top middle, and the two on the right together. It's kind of like having multiple pairs of side surround speakers, right? Same idea. Right. They're all getting the left side is getting the same signal, the right side is getting the same signal. That is, okay, again, Andrew, that is how I understood what you wrote. I might be off base, but that is what made sense in my mind. It is definitely the case, though, that he wants to end up with 7.4.6. So front heights, rear heights, top middles. That's
But in order to get 6, he's going to have 8 speakers
there physically will be 8 speakers. The top middles are going to be paying out of 2 speakers each, 2 speakers on the left, 2 speakers on the right. And then he did, like I said, he mentioned this idea of having the ideal Oro setup. And I'm like, okay, no mention of surround heights, so I don't know if he's putting speakers high up on his side walls directly above his surround speakers. There was no mention of that, so I don't think that's in the plans. And then he did use this label of center height at some points, but I think he was referring to the voice of God, the top surround channel, because again, in the HTP1, you cannot have an actual center height. That is a real speaker, a real channel label that exists on the front wall above the center speaker. But the HTP1, if it's doing that, it will matrix that into your 2 front height speakers. And it will play the center height channel out of a phantom center height that is in between your 2 front height speakers. It gets very confusing with these labels. But I think that's where we are. 7.4.6 is the end goal. That seemed to be clear.
All right. See, but then he wouldn't have enough channels. He's only got 16.
Yeah, I know. Only 16, man. Just slumming it.
So would it make sense to reduce the number of independent subwoofer channels in this HTP1 itself so that he can free up a channel to create top middles? He could still have 3 independent subwoofer channels in the HTP1. That would allow Dirac Live bass control to still work, and he could use his mini DSP to handle some of the subwoofer duties. What do we think is the best way to wire all this? Not at all. That is the best way to wire this. Stop. Step away from the wire, sir. Not at all. This is how you do it. You do it that way. You do it. You don't. You don't do it. So right now he's got every channel in his system taken up by things, right? Everything is taken up by things.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's using that very last channel as the 5th subwoofer output to feed the mini DSP that's handling his tactile transducers. Like, if it's just 7.4.4 right now, then he technically has 1 spare channel left over. But he did mention that he has a mini DSP that's controlling his tactile transducers. So I'm like, okay, that might be the 5th subwoofer output. I'm not entirely sure. Again, I was quite confused by exactly what's going on here. So I mean, look, I am in complete agreement with Tom that as much as I love getting geeky about this stuff, Oro 3D is not worth it, man. It is not worth it if you are really happy with the results of 4 subwoofers using Dirac Live bass management, or Dirac bass control is the proper name. If you're really happy with what it's done there, dude, I am not going to recommend stealing one of those independent subwoofer channels for a like the second top middle. That's what it was going to be. Voice of God. Like, I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do. That's my real advice. Okay, but let's put it aside. He's hell bent on having Voice of God. He's hell bent on having 6 overheads, top middles. If that's what you're going to do, here's what I'm honestly going to suggest. I'm going to suggest that you ignore the sunk cost fallacy. Mm-hmm. And you don't worry about the fact that you paid some extra money to get Dirac Live bass control, because the way to handle this is to have one subwoofer output from your HTP1 and do all of your bass managing duties in the mini DSP. That's the solution here, because trying to piecemeal it between Dirac Live bass control and the mini DSP, I'm not into that. I am not into that at all. I'm like, either you do it all in the mini DSP or you do it all in the Dirac Live bass control. That's my approach. I do not want to get into the complication of trying to like pre-bias the mini DSP so that it'll work with Dirac Live bass control, or try to do it in reverse. I'm just not about it. Now, you absolutely can do all the same things that are done in Dirac Live bass control with just the mini DSP. It's just you're going to have to do it manually. It's not going to be automatic anymore. And maybe that's half the reason you wanted bass control, Dirac Live bass control, because it's automatic instead of having to do it manually. But that is how I would do it. I'd either keep the subwoofer setup that you have and forget about the Voice of God, which is my real advice. I completely agree with Tom there.
Do that one.
But if you refuse to listen to that, then I would forget about Dirac Live bass control. I would set it back to a 0.1. There is a single subwoofer output coming out of that HTP1, and that is feeding a mini DSP, and you do all of your bass management in the mini DSP. That's my honest advice in this setup.
Okay. There is no world where I would ever recommend somebody run a Phantom sensor top middles and then add 2 more speakers like within feet. There's no world where I would do. I mean, how many so he's got 7 point already, right? So he's already got 2 speakers back there. A couple of feet up, he's going to have another speaker, and a couple of feet forward on the wall, he's going to have on the ceiling, he's going to have a couple other speakers. Yeah, it's just there's no world where I would see that would be something that I would recommend.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. But just to go on the opposite end of the rabbit hole, if you do decide, I'm doing this no matter what Tom and Rob say, I'm going to ignore their advice, but I am going to take the little bit of the advice that was just mentioned, and I'm just going to use a 0.1 coming out of the HTP1 and do all the subwoofer stuff in the mini DSP. Now, you do have the option, because at that point, you've gone to 7.1.6. Right? That's that. So now you have 2 channels left over, and those 2 channels could be surround heights. And when you talk about having exactly what Oro 3D wants you to have, you could have surround heights, and Dirac gives you enough memory slots in the configuration that you can have one configuration that is just for Oro 3D, which means instead of rear heights, you have surround heights, you still have front heights, and the 2 top middles are acting as your Voice of God, and then your other configuration does not have the surround heights, it has the rear heights again, and that's what you use for DTS X and Atmos. You could do that, so there's your other argument for doing the bass management that way. Don't do any of it, but that's how you could.
Yeah, I would, so if you're just determined to have this top middle thing happen, I would say you have to get actual top middles. Like, I don't think you necessarily have to put them in the wall and the ceiling. You can get like the prime elevations or some sort of angled speaker and put them up there or whatever. I'm fine with you doing that, but if you're gonna do top middles, you have to actually do top middles. Okay, that's what
none of this wiring to existing that are in front and behind together. Yeah, because that stereo imaging doesn't work. That's not how your ear is stereo image front to back. That doesn't work.
No. Tara, talk to your father. He's having some sort of episode. Tara, your father's having an episode. Go get him a glass of wine. He needs to settle down. He's talking about speakers again. Brenda, just do the airplane slap thing like that. All right, Terry. Terry wants to start by sharing his experience with Seymour AV. First, he wants to make it clear that his comments are totally unsolicited. He just thinks fellow AVRant listeners might like to know. His sales contact was John Kaizend. Yeah. And he was terrific. Not only did he provide samples and assistance in selecting the screen material, but also helped Terry plan how to mount the new frame on his false wall. It was great customer service from beginning to end. Terry previously had a silver ticket woven acoustically transparent screen, and it was fine. Definitely good for the price, but Terry wanted to take things to the next level. He wanted bigger, brighter, better, and another B word, and he wanted screen masking. Seymour AV provided all of that. The Premier frame was easier to assemble than the silver ticket. I have assembled one of those, and they can be a little tricky, but they're not too bad.
Yeah.
And securing the material was much easier, and that is a problem with the silver tickets. You definitely spend a little time sweating putting that material on there, and you're a little worried you're going to rip it, but it's whatever. So based on the samples, he went with the Center Stage XD fabric. It's considerably brighter, which means it has higher gain than the silver ticket was, and the image looks sharper on it. It's also an improvement in terms of the acoustical transparency. There's less attenuation in the high frequencies. Terry has heard our arguments for sticking with 16:9 aspect ratio, and he agrees they make sense. But he also knows what he personally likes, and he's been using a 16:9 screen this whole time. He hates movies that change aspect ratio. A pox on Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder, he says. Honestly, I am a little over both those dudes. They're getting a little bit too much up their own you-know-whats, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, a little too precious, in my opinion. But whatever. I got through half of that Army of the Dead movie before I just gave up. I have never been able to go back to it. I tried. So he went for a constant image height screen with a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio. He's got the magnetic masking panel so they can mask off the sides for 16:9. They're top quality, he says, and very simple to snap into place and to remove. He's very happy with that decision, but he does have a couple of questions and concerns. He knows that two shows in particular, Ted Lasso and C, which I don't know what C is, S-A-E.
That's the Jason Momoa where everybody's deaf, I think. I think that's what's going on. I haven't watched it.
I haven't seen it. Both on Apple TV Plus. I will tell you that the Foundation trailer
Foundation is coming.
That made me want to get Apple TV because I love Foundation. That thing looks amazing.
If you buy a PlayStation 5, you get 6 months free.
I'm not doing that, though. I'm not doing that. I'm going to wait till it comes out on DVD or on Blu-ray. I'm going to buy it. He said they're in non-standard aspect ratios. On a 16:9 screen, they have small black bars above and below, but they aren't 1.85 to 1. They're a bit wider than that. He doesn't know the exact aspect ratios, but C is also just a tiny bit wider than Ted Lasso. First of all, why? Why go for completely different and non-standard aspect ratios, especially when these are exclusively on a streaming service where you would have to assume almost everyone is watching them on a 16:9 screen? Are they, though? Are they not watching them on the Apple phones, which may not have exactly a 16:9 aspect ratio? Yeah. Are they, though? Because I don't know that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, iPads are closer to square than wider rectangle, and then iPhones, if you're willing to have the notch on the iPhone cutting out part of the image, then those are wider than 16:9. Right. So I don't know exactly what's going on. But then even if that were the case, you would expect them to be the same. I looked it up. IMDb actually is quite good on having accurate aspect ratios. So Ted Lasso is 2.0 to 1. That's what it is. So it is wider than 1.85. It's definitely wider than 1.78, or what we always call 16:9. Is 2.0 to 1, and then C is 2.1 to 1. It is ever so slightly wider than Ted Lasso. I don't entirely, I mean, artistic choice, that's the blanket answer, but I don't entirely know why they've gone for specifically those, or why Ted Lasso and C are different from one another, because even if it was to better fit the aspect ratio of an iPhone 12 with the notch in there.
At some point, you just think to yourself, somebody just didn't check a setting on the camera and they got stuck with it.
I don't think it's entirely by accident, but...
Okay, so... The one thing you got to remember is that cinematographers in particular, if they're filming something that is a character-based something, they want something that's narrower and taller so that they get more of the character in there. If they're looking for something that's more cinematic or, has a lot of landscapes or sweeping views, they want something wider and shorter. So why are these like that? To piss you off. I'm pretty sure that's exactly why they did it. They're like, I want to be unique. Okay, you're unique. Everyone hates you now. Okay, that's why nobody likes all those goth people. I know. I was one of those guys in high school. So take my word for it. We be different, so people will ostracize us, so that we can feel like we're being downtrodden, even though we're middle class white boys. That's what happens. So yeah,
that's the best I got. All I can do is tell you what they actually are. I don't know why.
So he can use his projector's motorized zoom so that Ted Lasso and C fill the entire height of his screen. That makes them wider than 16:9, so he can either take down his magnetic masking panels and have black screen space on both sides, or he can leave these masking panels in place and simply crop off a bit of the sides. Either way, he prefers to keep the entire height of the screen filled. But in order to zoom his JVC projector, an RS2000, he has to press the lens control button, and that automatically puts a grid up on the screen. In other words, he can't see the content while he's zooming, only the grid. So it has a lot of back and forth, trial and error. At least once it's done, he can save that position to one of the lens memories. But is there an easier way to adjust the zoom in the first place? Well, the easiest way is to not watch these shows.
Or
let's just start with that.
To just leave the projector to what would be 16:9 and live with the fact that there are little black bars on the top and bottom, because it's a JVC projector, so those black bars are not bright black bars. They are there. Yeah. But he's like, no, I want constant image height, no matter what, come hell or high water. That's what he wants.
The showrunners of these two shows with very specific complaints, because I'm sure they will be very interested to hear what you have to say. Yeah, I mean,
there isn't a better solution. In fact, I even checked on the Sofabaton U1 in its database to see if maybe there were zoom in and out button commands that aren't on the original JVC remote, because occasionally there are discrete commands that don't show up on the remote that came packed in. But nope, there is just the lens control button, and that takes you to this sub menu that puts the grid up on the screen. So it is the trial and error. This is what you have wrought by going with the constant image height setup with the 2.35:1 screen. This is part of what you have to live with. But facetiousness aside, poking a bit of fun aside, it is unfortunately just the trial and error, exactly what you're doing. Now, thankfully, you do have 10 lens memories, so it's not as though you have to, sacrifice the preset for 16:9 and 2.35:1 if you only had 2 or 3 lens memories or something. At least you got 10 to work with. So 2.0:1 and 2.1:1 and 1.33:1. These can all be amongst what you have going on there. 1.85:1, 1.43:1. The list can go on up to 10. So once you have those, then that's what you got.
Yeah.
So we've got to do mics because we teased it, and then that's got to be our last one.
Definitively a first world problem right here. Like, but I want it to be this way, and I am slightly poking fun, but just know that deep down inside, I'm irritated more with anybody who won't just pick a freaking aspect ratio and stick with it. I'm like, I understand that, somebody's out there right now who's, and I know that 2.0:1 is something that there's a lot of cinematographers who like. They like that aspect ratio because they think it's a better blend than 16:9 and
they want the wide feel, but without black bars that are so big that people complain about it. I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And I know what that they like this, and that's fine. But deep down inside, I'm just like, just be one of us. Just submit. Just be part of just conform to what's there.
Hey, things are, you got all the Quibi lineup that's over on Roku now. You can watch stuff in 9:16 instead. Isn't that better? I wouldn't take up a lens memory with 9:16, but you could.
You could.
I said Mike, it's Matt.
Matt, what price point do we think delivers maximum bang for your buck when it comes to speakers? Maybe $200 of speakers sound twice as good as $100 speakers. That's not necessarily true. But are $2,000 speakers going to sound twice as good as $1,000 speakers? There's a point where it becomes diminishing returns, right? So in their opinions, what's the inflection point? Yeah, so we did tease this quite a bit, when I was talking, I guess I was talking about on the accident. But there is a law of diminishing returns that comes here, but it's actually, there's no for me, individual price point, because a lot of things has to do with the type of speaker that you're dealing with as well. So, subwoofers for a long time, you couldn't buy a subwoofer that was of any quality for less than $2,000. They were all the stuff that you could get from the name brand manufacturers were all pretty much garbage. And then the online stuff, they were making them in their garages, and it cost so much to make them that, $2,000 was about what you could pay to get like an SVS or an HSU back in the day. So that price point's come down quite a bit, and now I think for most people, if you're spending $1,000 on a sub, and sometimes even $1,000 on
but we're not talking about subs here.
I know, but I'm getting around to that.
Okay,
if you're spending $1,000 sub or $1,000 on 2 subs, you'll hit the price point where above that you better have a big room and have a reason for it. Speakers, on the other hand, you've got so many different types, but if we're just talking about our front speakers, we've got our tower speakers versus our bookshelf speakers. So price points for a bookshelf versus price points for a tower. That's why I'm almost always recommending bookshelves over towers, because I feel like you can get more sound quality out of a bookshelf because you're not paying for an integrated stand and for a bunch of bass that you probably don't need, and you're just going to crossover out anyways. So I don't know that there's a particular price point that I would recommend, but I do not think that in my theater less than $1,000 a pair would ever be good enough for my ears. I just think that $1,000 is where you get to the price point where things start, at least in my mind, for a bookshelf speaker, start to even out, and you start to see there's definitely gains to be had. I'm not saying that that's not, but at $1,000 you get to the point where I'm like, okay, well, this sounds pretty good. It could sound better, yes, but it sounds pretty good. Tower speakers gets a lot closer to that $2,000 price point for the same.
And you're talking a pair. So it's like $2,000 a pair.
Yes, a pair. Right. So, I mean, that can go up quite a bit. So am I going to say that that $2,500 bookshelf speaker isn't a quality improvement over a $1,000 bookshelf speaker? No. And I might even say that quality improvement is worth that amount of money. But
the difference from going to $1,000 a pair bookshelf to $2,000 a pair bookshelf is not the type of difference as going from like $250 a pair to $500. There's a bigger gap. Yeah, you're into diminishing returns. Yeah,
right. At least that's my sort of general sense. Okay. And I haven't shot for speakers for a long time, but when I get speakers in here to review and I look at their price points, a lot of times I'm like, you can get this for less. Yeah. You could do better than that.
Yeah, I think for I mean, this is very subjective, of course, but for my tastes, I always talk about how with speakers, when you're starting as cheap as you can get and you're just trying to get something that's kind of decent, for a while there's a stretch where every improvement you're getting in your speakers as you're maybe spending a little bit more is just trying to get the speakers to make more sound. You're trying to get extension all the way up to 20 kilohertz and extension all the way down to at least a viable crossover point so they can at least play linearly right down to, I want to go linear a little bit below 80 so that when the electronic slope is applied to them, you get proper crossovers. But what I don't want is a speaker that, is missing a bunch of high frequencies, and at the really, really cheap end, you are just flat out missing high frequencies. The highs are rolled off, or they artificially pumped it up to try and make it sound more detailed, but it's not at all accurate. And then, there are speakers that are just so small and so cheap that they can't play anything below 200 hertz or something like that. You are legitimately missing stuff that should be there in the crossover. As you go up in price for a while, it's about expanding that range so that you have nice, accurate, linear response across the entire audible frequency range. But once you get that, which to me, I think you can get speakers that deliver that, I'm thinking, Ascend's SE series, they're getting darn close to that, and those they're just north of $500 a pair. You're in between $500 and $1,000 a pair. So in that whole price range, in between $500 and $1,000 a pair, I think you're finding all the speakers that are at the point where they're finally playing everything you're supposed to be able to hear and doing so quite accurately.
Yeah, down to 80 hertz or 60 hertz or something like that. Yeah,
and not rolling off the highs anymore. once you go above that, what I think we're actually starting to pay for is less sound. We're paying for less distortion. We're paying for faster transient response, so less sound hanging around. When you play a really fast impulse, it's gone out of that speaker right away. It's not continuing to wobble through inertia and producing more sound than the signal actually asked it to. That's the refinement area where I think there are advances to be had, but it's not nearly as noticeable as this sound literally wasn't playing before, or it was playing but not accurately, and now it's finally playing either full stop or it's finally playing accurately. That's a much bigger difference than, okay, I've slightly improved the distortion, I've slightly improved the transient response. That's getting kind of nitpicky above that price.
And that's where it becomes much harder to even evaluate speakers at that point.
Yeah.
And
that's where times, it's like your room is probably going to be a much bigger weakness versus the speakers themselves. Yeah.
That's why when somebody comes to us and they're like, I've got these speakers and they're $500 a pair, and I'm looking to upgrade speakers because I can't understand the dialogue. We're like, okay. Back off the gas there, Mr. Spend a bunch of money. Give me a picture of your room because I just want to see. It's like a marble fortress. You're like, okay, so before we spend any more money, let's look at acoustics and talk about why it is that your speakers are probably doing just fine, and anything else you put in here is going to be actually worse. You get something that has faster transient response, more output, more extension, and you put it in this room that is highly reflective. Well, the highly reflectiveness is just going to be accentuated even more. So, like Rob's saying, I think there's a point where people are just buying the gear and getting everything put together, and they're like, oh, and we had somebody talking about BIC earlier. Oh, I've got these big speakers. No, your room and big speakers do not go together, okay? Big speakers are for people who have speakers and a TV and some cinder blocks to put them on. You know what I mean?
They're still within that entry-level range I was talking about, where you can have improvements just in terms of what the speaker is outputting. We're not into the refinement stage yet. You can do better than that just in terms of getting proper, linear, accurate extension at both ends at that point. Yeah, to put it in number terms, price terms like Matt wants us to do, so I'm going to say I'm basically reached a same agreement. About $1,000 a pair, I think, is where it starts to turn on you. It starts to turn into more, you're getting into more refinement as opposed to really noticeable differences once you start getting above that price point. And that's also the point where I'm going to say, you almost certainly want to focus on your room more than the speakers once you're getting above $1,000 a pair. If you have everything in really good order acoustically in your room, I can personally justify what I consider to be audible, worthwhile differences. I would go all the way up to about $3,000 a pair, because now I'm talking about like KEF R series, right? Sure. Those are into $3,000 a pair. I'm talking, like a pair of Ascend Horizons as your pair of speakers. Those are going to be up. What are those? $2,700, $2,800, right? So I can get up to there and justify that in my own mind. Beyond that, I'm like, now I'm thinking it's really more about looks or just sheer output. There's more sheer output to be had in a really large room. But it's, in terms of like the quality of the sound, it starts getting really hard for me to justify.
And this is where this podcast, Rob and I, differ from all the audiophiles out there, because what they start looking for when they get past this price point, and they goes way past this price point, is they're looking for speakers that are audibly different than other speakers, which means they are not as accurate. But then they pair them with other inaccurate things in order to try to make them as engaging, whatever the heck that means, as possible. So we don't do that. We get accurate gear and we plug it all in and we listen to go, that's exactly what it's supposed to sound like, and I'm happy I have it. And then we're done. We're not sitting here trying to spend more money in order to get something else that is also accurate, but we had to do it by buying, $10,000 cables that are, basically EQs, along with a non-linear amp that, plays, has a completely different impedance curve when it's at one temperature versus another temperature because of the tubes that are in it, and then the speakers that are just massive horns that I can't sit farther enough away because my room's not big enough. I hate to say that, but we can all kind of experience this in whatever hobby that you are a member of. Like in my hobby of climbing, it's it's hard to spend a lot of money on climbing if you just climb at the climbing gym or something like that. If you do trad climbing and you climb outside, you can spend a ton of money just on gear, which people love to do. But if you're just a regular gym rat, maybe you climb outside a couple times a year and you just do top roping or maybe a little bit of lead climbing, but single pitch, and you're not doing any trad climbing, there's for most people, you can spend $100 on a pair of shoes, and that is all you ever really need to spend on a pair of shoes. Like, that is fine. Are there $250 pairs of shoes out there? Yes. Do people who are brand new to climbing buy them? Absolutely. Does it help them climb any better? Absolutely not. Does nothing for them. Nothing that they couldn't have gotten out of a $50 or $75 or $100 because their level of climbing hasn't gotten there yet. But even me, my shoes that I bought the same shoes the last 5 or 6 times that are $170 a pair, and I buy them not because of their performance, not because of how much they help me climb. It's because those shoes fit me perfectly. I get them out of the box. They're tight for the first day, and after that, they break in and they're fine for about a year until they stretch out too much, and I have to buy another pair. So, and the rubber starts to go at that point too. But that's fine. And in most hobbies, no matter what hobby you're in, there are people out there that would just spend more money because they like to spend that money.
Oh, there's that.
And in AV, I believe that once you get to that certain point of spending money on speakers that are accurate, getting accurate gear, treating your room, you look around like Mr. Oro 3D and say, I want to do more, but there's nothing more to do.
Right.
And that's disappointing to some people. They're like, but I like doing this. I want to do more of this. I'm like,
I mean, we have a listener called Infinite Gary who, he enjoys spending money on the hobby and is quite frequently looking for something new to add. Sometimes struggling to do so.
And maybe for Mr. Aura 3D, Tara's dad, Tara, tell your dad to have your bedroom for his next project. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, Dad, is there any way you could wire my room up so that I could have sound in here? Because that would make Dad happy, and also stop him from doing what he's trying to do in the home theater. You know what I mean? So that's where at that point I start pushing people out. Like, wouldn't it be nice if you had sound outside? Wouldn't it be nice if you had a whole home audio? Wouldn't it be nice if you had a 2-channel listening room in another area in another room? That sort of thing.
And getting into making your own content server if you don't already have one, or heck, save up and invest in a Kaleidoscape, because that's going to be a fun experience too.
Right. So I mean, I think on that level, we are a disservice to real enthusiasts, because they want to have more to do, and we are not as enthusiastic about encouraging them to do more. We're like, you're done. You already did it. You've succeeded.
There is a point where you're pretty much
won.
Done.
You won home theater. You won home theater. Give yourself, you know what you need to do? You're going to go down to the local trophy title place, and have them engrave you a plaque that says, I won home theater.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in a 15-foot by 21-foot room, and you've already got 4 15-inch subwoofers, and it's like, go into the 8 18-inch subs. It's not going to change anything.
It's not going to change anything. You might feel better about it, but it's not going to sound any different.
Bottom line for Matt, are we comfortable saying we think the inflection point is around $1,000 a pair?
It's definitely for bookshelves, yes.
Yeah.
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's where I'm definitely going to encourage someone to look at their room more than their speakers if they're at that point. And we'll agree there is still more performance to potentially be gained above that price point, but we are into diminishing returns. And then once you get to about triple that price, up to around $3,000 a pair, we're again sticking with bookshelf speakers, then we're getting real small diminishing returns after that.
Yeah, and with the caveat being, if you're in a large room and you need a lot of output, that changes things. We're assuming a 12-foot or less listening distance, which is where most
even
of
up to
us
15.
live.
You're going to be pretty darn fine with those speakers up to 15. But if you got a big old place where you're in a legitimate 30-foot by 40-foot space, that takes something entirely different.
All right, who do we have left, Rob?
We have Mark Monty, another Mark, Same spelling, different last names, and Steven. They are all
that.
on the list. I definitely had another question that looked interesting that came in on Monday, so that'll be on the list too. It was wee hours of Monday morning, but I cut it off Sunday night. My time. I go by my time. That's what matters. I'm the one looking at the emails. So when the timestamp comes in and it says 2 a.m. on Monday morning, that's Monday. It's Monday.
There you go. All right. We want to thank our listeners in the week. We want to thank Mark for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 133 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yeah, Mark, thanks so much for the PayPal donation, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone else who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 133 patrons over there.
And thank Andrew for sending us Amazon gift cards as well.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That was very nice of you. We appreciate it.
Terry talked us up to Seymour AV, and David sent some photos to me to use with on AV Gadgets, which I will be using. We also got some notes of gratitude from Jack, Daniel, Nick, Jay, John, David, Matt, Stephen, and Kevin. So thank you very much.
Look at that list. I will say thank you to Terry for talking us up to Seymour AV. Thank you to David for giving Tom permission to use your photos on avgadgets.com. And I will say thank you to Gary, Infinite Gary, for trying to help out Jason from last week with a recommendation for another dual cassette deck. I think that's worth thanking, but Tom just conspicuously wants to leave Infinite Gary off the
leaving
list.
them off.
That's how it goes. Should have been a comment in Tom's opinion, but where else am I going to mention it? And then Jack, Daniel, Nick, Jay, John, David, Matt, Stephen, and Kevin, thank you all so much for the notes of gratitude to us for keeping the podcast going. We greatly appreciate that encouragement, and thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
And if you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Mantry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.